will call to order a meeting of the Wilsonville City Council on Monday, April 3rd at 5:04 p.m., starting with the work session. And I'd like to ask the councilors to review the agenda and items on consent and let me know if you have any suggested changes to that. Yep. Thank you. Are there any councilor concerns anyone would like to bring up now? Seeing none, that brings us to our work session, and we'll start with a staff report on the Regional Transportation Plan Project List endorsement.
Good evening, Mayor Fitzgerald and Council. My name is Zach Weigel, City Engineer, and with me is Kelsey Lois, Smart Grants and Programs Manager. And we're here tonight to talk to you about the Regional Transportation Plan and the Wilsonville Smart Project List to be included in that plan. So before you tonight on consent agenda is a resolution that does two things. It endorses the Wilsonville Smart RTP or Regional Transportation Plan project list, and then it also authorizes the mayor to sign a letter to Metro stating as such. So most of you, I'm sure, have heard of the Regional Transportation Plan. As I said, it's referred to a lot as the RTP. So it's just what it sounds like. It's a Portland Metro Regional Transportation Plan. It includes all the modes of transportation: driving, transit, biking, walking, and freight. It's a 20-year plan, and it's updated every 5 years. It's hard to believe it's already been 5 years. Felt like we just went through this. So Kelsey and I have been working on this plan for a long time now, so happy to get to this point. So it has multiple purposes. The RTP, it's a long-term version for the region's transportation system, but it also helps the region define goals, as you see in the image there. Making sure that transportation improvements are equitable, that we're thinking about all the mobility options, we're supporting the economy, and that the improvements are safe and we're meeting climate goals. It also sets policies to make sure to help guide decisions on which transportation improvements get made. And then it also includes a financial plan and an investment strategy to help prioritize those transportation improvements. So most important to Wilsonville is that having a project on the RTP means that project is eligible to receive federal and state grants. If you don't have if the project's not on the list, then you're not eligible for those types of funding. So all agencies submit projects to be included on the list. Transit's a little bit different. Kelsey can get into kind of the requirements for transit, but generally it needs to be located on a regional network, which means it's either on an arterial or a collector or a regional trail or in a town center. It also needs to be part of an adopted master plan, and the project needs to be greater than $2 million. So for Wilsonville's projects, they all came from the Transportation System Plan or the Frog Pond East and South Master Plan or the Smart Transit Master Plan. So there's a whole list of the list of the projects to be included in the RTP are included in the packet. There's a lot more detail on what the RTP is in there. The next steps for the project is this letter of endorsement from the council is due to Metro by May 24th. And then Metro is currently in the process of assessing all of the projects to be included in the RTP, and that's going to extend through June. a draft of the RTP will be made available to the public for review starting on July 10th, and that will extend to the end of summer. And then final action on the RTP is scheduled for the end of November of this year. So again, we're recommending adoption of Resolution 3052 on consent agenda that will endorse the RTP project list from Wilsonville and authorize the mayor to sign a letter stating so. Happy to answer any questions.
I'm not, any questions, councilors? On the fine print of this project list, I just want to make sure that we have the 65th Road.
So 65th and Stafford,
Yes.
Ellickson. That is a Clackamas County project, and it is on their list.
Good.
We made sure it was included, so we've been coordinating with them on that.
And that, the significance of that being on the regional transportation plan is that it is noted as an important improvement needed.
That's right.
And then what else do we need to do to advocate to get the partners that may be Clackamas County, Washington County, and possibly, I know that is not city land, but can you just talk about what our role would be in advocating for that, please?
Yeah, so I think the first step is to make sure it's in the RTP that makes it eligible for other federal, state funding for that project. And, the staff is continuing to work with county staff on improvements to that intersection with, as we've discussed before, with the Beckman Road corridor project, we'll be installing a signal at that intersection that will help mitigate some of the traffic that's occurring there now. So baby steps are happening.
Thank you. Councilor Dunwell.
Just a quick question. You mentioned the Beckman Road project and the temporary traffic signal. What date, I don't recall which date that is that the traffic signal is going to become active and they're going to begin construction and shut down Beckman.
Yeah, so the installation of the traffic signal is scheduled to start construction in July, and it needs to be in place by August, end of August. So the equipment is actually on order right now. It has a long lead time. So yeah, it's in process.
Councilor Berry.
So I'm just curious, on that signal, it's going to be on Stafford Road, and so it will be like a three-way light?
Yeah, that's right, Stafford and 65th.
And then when you go around the corner, as if you were going to go up the hill, but then you turn left to head to Target, that's just going to be a stop sign just like it is?
Yeah, there'll be a few traffic changes, but it'll be stop signs on 65th and on Ellickson. Yeah.
All right, well, looks like we've got all of our questions answered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the Frog Pond East and South Implementation Development Code with Mr. Pauly.
Good evening, Council. Good to be with you again. Give me a moment to get the presentation going here. All right, so we're coming back. We have spoken about Frog Pond a time or two before, as you know, so we continue to work on implementation, including some details of the development code. I will note, as we discuss tonight, that some of these, while really triggered and kind of related to Frog Pond East and South, while we're in the code and the noticing, it really makes sense, and we'll talk about this, to make similar changes citywide. So let's get into the topics, and these are all topics that have previously, Planning Commission has gone through in quite some detail, and at this point, they're pretty comfortable with it. So all these items we're bringing to you are things that they've thought through and they feel are ready to move forward. So welcome your comments, but know that your Planning Commission has looked at them in quite detail at this point. So the first one is the design criteria for the Brisbane Main Street, which is the mixed-use portion of the Frog Pond East and South neighborhood. And it's the fuchsia color that you see on the map in the master plan, which is off of Stafford Road at Southwest Brisbane Street. And you'll see this theme, and we've talked about this in prior work sessions. We're really not trying to reinvent the wheel when we know there's a wheel out there that works pretty well. That's kind of a basic principle we're using, adapting things maybe we have in other zones here in the city that we've paid money and worked through community processes to adopt. So in that case, to come up with a main street for this fairly small, relatively small Main Street area is to incorporate standards from the town center zone that went through the process for the town center Main Street, and just adapt those really to this location. So that is what we've done. So some highlights of the sort of things that are coming into place for these is really having the buildings close to the street, like you'd expect on a kind of urban filling Main Street. Buildings will be fairly tall. As mixed-use buildings, we're anticipating these, and speaking to potential developers, would be 4 stories with ground floor plus 3 stories of residential above. You'd have all the entrances oriented towards the street rather than towards any rear parking, with covered entries and weather protection. That off-street parking that is provided will either be to the rear or to the sides, anticipating primarily to the rear in this case. We have some other standards that kind of are in town center as well as are consistent with some of our residential standards. That includes minimum window coverage to percent of the facades that have windows, as well as requiring articulation so you don't have big blank facades for very long. So those are the main standards, and really we think this area, using those town center standards, will really make sense for this sort of development we anticipate here. So that is, if you have any quick questions on that, we can stop there. I'd recommend, though, if you're okay with it, let's go through the different topics and then we can come back. But I'll kind of take your lead if you want to kind of talk about these one by one, since they do kind of vary. I mean, otherwise it would be quite a bit of jumping around. I mean, we're essentially flipping to another chapter of the book after this slide, so.
May I ask? Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just clarify for me, Dan, if you would again, 4 stories does or does not require an elevator?
It does require an elevator. So these would be elevator-served units, which have a meaning in terms of accessibility and things like that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, and I wanted to just say for counselors during work session, you can just go ahead and speak. I don't need to call on everyone. Go ahead.
Okay. 2 questions about this commercial area. One of them, I noticed in the packet there were specifications about the windows, and as you said, like minimum windows but also that the windows would be clear windows instead of like the frosted or something like this. And I was thinking through that because one of the uses also that was kind of called out or suggested that may potentially work in this area was medical facilities. And sitting at my dentist the other week, they have frosted glass that, because it's a lot of windows in that space, kind of similar to what we might imagine here. And it's a lot more comfortable to be in the dentist chair when you have frosted glass instead of being on display to the street as you're having that done, right? So, and I could imagine that something might be similar for like a physical therapy office, or some of these other types of medical offices may need to have that kind of frosted glass, at least for the lower part of the window. Is that something that would be allowed through a waiver process, or like they could apply the sticker things or something? I was just thinking about how that might work for some sorts of uses. It's actually, some childcare might also need to have the frosted glass or something like that. I don't know. So question about that. And then also wondering about deliveries for this space, because I understand the street, trying to really have it be very walkable and easy to cross. And if we have a lot of parking on the street, sometimes it's harder to see and to move around as a pedestrian. And so we have that parking more in the rear of the building. But how would deliveries happen in this landscape? If you could just talk through that too.
Sure. I can talk through both of those briefly.
Perfect.
So the frosted glass may need some follow-up, but I will start it by saying that there are a number of solutions. And because for example, around Fred Meyer, that complex had a similar requirement that those storefronts facing were clear glass. Because there's also, you can build a wall behind the glass sometimes, so because there's not only the ability to see into the building, it's also more aesthetic thing that as you look down the street that you have the same glazing and not a variety of glazing.
I see. Like the reflection, you want the reflection to be consistent.
So when I was writing the sign code, we got into this in real detail about, it's okay to put the sticker on the inside, but not the outside, because it does have a visual difference.
Yeah, okay. That's helpful clarification.
And deliveries, so there is on-street parking. There's the off-street parking. Let me clarify. The off-street parking is required to be behind, but there is on-street parking.
But like some of the trucks, they would need more than just a regular car slot to pull up.
That will end up depending on the size of the unit. So the existing development code, which no proposal to change, does have loading bay requirements. So if it's all one large tenant space, there's a potential that it would trigger having a loading bay. But if it's all smaller tenant spaces, they wouldn't typically have a loading bay, as in most any other commercial strip center. So, and so it'd be either from the parking lot or from the street, which would be pretty typical in this sort of development.
I have a quick question, too. From a limited use standpoint, I'm not that familiar with the town center plan. Is there an allowance for some of the limited use for the commercial use on the first floor to also include potentially a cafe or a restaurant or something along that line?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, for instance, in Villebois, they ran into the issue because they had the apartments above on the corner unit, which made it difficult to place an exhaust fan at the time of construction. Yeah, you know that well.
Oh, yeah.
How do we solve that again?
I think that was a big enough deal in Wilsonville that hopefully anyone that has any institutional memory of that Villebois tenant space wouldn't let that happen again. But I do know in even the future proposed Villebois tenant spaces, that's definitely come up, and we've discussed that with the design is, make sure if you think there's going to be a restaurant that you accommodate for venting. And that would go for here too. It is more difficult in this sort of tenant space, but it's hard to put that kind of detail into a master plan, but it's definitely something that I think everyone's aware of at this point.
I understand that because you don't know who will want to occupy that space, right? But it is sort of you're restricting the use at development if there's not at least a conduit that may not be used or some type of venting space, even though it's capped off. Can that be allowed?
A specific venting space, again,
at least have the space so it can vent out even though it's capped off at the ceiling?
I have to see if that discussion came up in town center and check with colleagues on that, but my recollection is that's probably a detail we wouldn't put in the development code, be more a building code type issue.
Yeah.
So could I ask another question related? Because I thought it had also to do with, at the time of construction, years ago, perhaps the builder just decided not to go to that expense. It could have been put in and it just wasn't, they weren't compelled to build it for use as a restaurant.
Correct.
Could we, so what is the way that you do that? Is you're indicating the master plan is not the best time to do it, but would it be at the later development review board? And, or I had another thought, could we as a city council come up with some kind of incentive or some other mechanism to incentivize those customizations for tenants, because we know that our residents want that.
Yeah. I'll have to talk with Dan Carlson and others to see really does that belong more. Is that a local building code that goes with a multi-story building like that, or what discussions happened, or is it where that type of regulation?
It seems like there's an easy way to miss that. Then the building gets built and then you're stuck. And so how do we not miss that opportunity?
Yeah, I think we can circle back on that.
I have
Thanks,
a quick
Dan.
question, too. So on your slide here, it says off-street parking to the rear and the side of the buildings, but the photo, and then I think you mentioned, well, actually, there would be some on-street parking.
Yes.
So which one?
So off-street parking, meaning like surface parking lot. So on-street, there's on-street parking and off-street parking typically in a development. So on-street parking would be on the street here, obviously in front of the building.
There would be off-street parking to the rear of the side of the buildings. But
In addition.
In addition,
it's going to be both.
both,
Okay.
yes. Okay. Anything else on Main Street? I appreciate those questions and have that noted for follow-up. So the next topic is multifamily design standards. So we have design standards that council adopted back in 2019 for detached single-family homes as well as middle housing. This was all part of the middle housing project. But there's no design standards that apply to multifamily housing. So currently multifamily would go through a DRB process, even a smaller multifamily building, similar to would go through what a project would go through for like a commercial, for a commercial or industrial user. So without those design standards, and we'll talk more about process later, that when you get into how Frog Pond East and South is set up, where really you can put, and we've talked in the master plan and got direction from the council, that a lot of these areas you can put any of the above. It's just really limited by the shape and size and the bulk of the building. And so if you can put middle housing or an apartment building on a single site, you want to have similar standards. And so really coming up then with, if it's a similar bulk of a building, having similar standards to a row house building or something like that is really what we're aiming for here. So what is proposed is to adapt some middle housing standards, again, something that has already been vetted with the community and the council that work for multifamily. Townhouse articulation standards, for example, is something that works really well. That really, because it's the same kind of size of building, if you will. There are some proposed new standards specific to multifamily, such as where parking goes, pedestrian circulation. And the other we had a great conversation, particularly at Planning Commission, about this. Does it make sense if we're doing this for east and south, the same principles, where somewhere where multifamily and anticipate hopefully a mix of uses in any other future residential areas in Wilsonville as well, is to apply these standards, these ideas citywide. So the type of standards we're talking about that we would apply to all new multifamily is the orientation of the entrance, that really having a pedestrian-oriented, where it's either facing the street or facing onto a porch or courtyard. Again, that minimum window coverage, which is applied to similarly sized structures for middle housing. Articulation of facades, which is applied to a variety of housing types, and then the pedestrian connectivity, and similarly parking to the side or rear. And where it's to the side and visible from the street, make sure that that's screened. So again, these are consistent with standards that we have established elsewhere in the code in terms of the parking screening. So those are the main highlights of what we're looking at. I know there's a lot more detail in your packet. Happy to go into any more of that detail, but I'll pause for any questions on this package of design standards and whether this approach makes sense.
So Dan, I have a question. What multifamily housing standards were used in Villebois as well as in Old Town?
So great question. So first of all, let's talk Villebois. Villebois had a very detailed whole chapter really about the standards. Whole books were published about these very detailed standards. And so, and are probably too detailed to apply widely in the city. Really took a professional architect to review. And it was very specific design types to kind of speak to that design language of Villebois. So that was kind of where there was a master plan, very detailed design guidance for those buildings in Villebois. Old Town, generally the Old Town residential zone doesn't allow multifamily. You say, well, what about that project we just approved? So that was kind of a one-off where it was this remnant property to the multifamily that surrounds it. So in that case, it was subject. There are some more subjective design standards for the Old Town design overlay that was subject to. Needing to reflect Willamette Valley architecture from 1880 to whatever it was. I don't remember the year, but.
So what I hear you saying is that neither of those two fit for Frog Pond, for east and south, or do portions of them fit and then we're modifying or changing them, or?
So neither of those really fit because of level of detail, and also they were geared towards very specific kind of design languages, design precedents, right? You're talking about that European village, the very specific variety of types in Villebois. Then, of course, Old Town trying to go after that specific era and things consistent with that era. And also, Old Town is very subjective. It's not very detailed or objective as we're required to have for housing.
Okay.
So I would just want to clarify or kind of find out more about what you're maybe thinking or might be missing here, Councilor Linville, as an idea. Should we give more guidance here?
So Wilsonville's had a lot of great question. Wilsonville's had a lot of experience, including these two, of regulating architecture. Right. And really, I mean, Villebois was very detailed, and really what we get from that experience is what are those regulations from our experience and that have the most impactful without being, overly detailed. So what are those things that really make a difference? We've studied that and had experience in Villeball, but also we gave a lot of thought to that as we developed the standards for middle housing as well. What are those things that really make a development, cohesive with single family around it? Or which things really came up? Articulation, some minimum levels of variety such as paint and materials, and just some sort of architectural variety where it's not too repetitive. So we really tried to boil it down to those most essential elements to really have an impact, to make sure we have designs that it's not overly cumbersome to meet from a designer and a developers, and it has a big impact in creating and impacting the public view shed throughout the city.
So,
Even with the detailed instructions, so to speak, in the Villebois pattern book, and there is a lot of interpretation. One person could look at something and say, well, I don't think that fits it. And another person, an architect, could say, yes, that is within the range of what you described. So they ended up with some decent variety.
Yeah.
But I suppose different people have different ideas on how much variety they want.
Yeah.
And I really like the idea of you applying it citywide and, for future developments. I think the idea of future residents and future citizens that come into Wilsonville, they kind of get to know they're in Wilsonville. It has kind of a mood and a tone to it, whether it's middle family housing, single or multi. I like the fact that carries through over a period of time. It can't go on forever, right? Because things go out of style, but the spirit of it could remain.
And that out of style and we've run into that even in some of the frog pond standards that we adopted for West, that they're very kind of geared towards more traditional styles. And so really, we want to write our standards where it supports quality of architecture of a variety of styles. So.
Thank you.
So with that said, if we do have these clear and objective standards, what's the review process? Mentioned that currently multifamily goes through the DRB for any multifamily for the architecture. So what's proposed, we talked about this a lot of Planning Commission as well, is for multifamily buildings of up to 6 units, which are similar to scale to townhouses or plexes, that those would go through the same process. No notice to neighbors or the public. Essentially, they'd get their building permit, and it'd be the same process as detached homes and middle housing. Planning Commission wasn't really ready to go there for larger multifamily, but still they felt that the DRB, going to DRB for these buildings didn't make much sense either. So kind of that balanced approach going through a Class 2 process, which those of you that served on DRB know is where the DRB and neighbors get notice of the decision. It is a staff decision, and it can be appealed or called up, but if not, it moves forward, and there's not a public hearing.
And I just want to add a little context, or ask you to add a little context about the public discussion all across the state about is the level of deliberation required for building permits contributing to the lack of housing?
That is a very big topic down in Salem right now.
And it is very big, and there's even legislation proposed to maybe make it impossible to do any of this that's on the screen in the future.
Yeah, so even, essentially making everything essentially a Class 1.
And so, so in Wilsonville, we do have a lot of input like that, but could you just talk about why, the benefits and the reasoning for kind of smoothing out some of the steps?
So let's talk about it from a variety of perspectives. First of all, from the developer's perspective, from the producers of the housing, that is anytime there's a public hearing, though Wilsonville has, I think, overall a strong history of good public hearings, of not a lot of appeals to the state, any developer has had very bad experiences in this or other jurisdictions that it creates a lot of uncertainty. So whenever they're spending money to design a project or to design a home, and there's the uncertainty of public hearing, that alone actually discourages development. Just having public hearing, because it introduces uncertainty, and they're investing a lot of money prior to that uncertainty. Especially when you're talking clear and objective standards. And that's an important component of this, is we're talking housing that's required under state law to have clear and objective standards. So these aren't where we're creating policy on the fly, where it's where essentially there's a checklist of standards that this housing needs to meet, and either it does or it doesn't, essentially. So the developer, obviously it saves a bit of time, oftentimes not that much time, but it's more kind of that uncertainty that's probably the biggest deal for developers, as well as the time. From a staff perspective and from a city perspective, where we're applying these clear and objective standards, it often can become an awkward situation for our volunteer board members. And I know some of you that served on DRB are familiar with this, where essentially you're faced with a room of residents that may not want a development, that have strong emotions about it. And you want to acknowledge them and be responsive to what they have to say, but at the same time, you have the attorney and the planner sitting here is like, you just have to, go through the checklist, really. The policy's set, you can't really be responsive to that. So it really puts those volunteers in a very awkward position. And at the same time, for those residents that are coming, that may have invested a lot of time and to really prepare for that hearing, thinking that they're going to have an input in city government, and in reality, they really can't change much because of the nature of these clear and objective standards at this point. Hopefully, ideally, they were involved in development of those standards that went through a public process, but once those standards are set, and if the project meets those, there's not much they can say, even if it's the worst thing in the world. And, in their opinion, and so from that perspective, I hope I'm making sense with this explanation, is really we want to gear that public input into areas that they do have impact, that we're able to make changes, new policies, rather than something that we set them up for feeling like they're not heard in those public hearings, and then putting our boards in an awkward position. So that's part of it too. But in the end, and then that adds time and costs money and that uncertainty. So it just ends up being a mix where, in a situation where really there are a lot of discretion for a board in approving a project, like historically there has been, there's a good argument to have those kinds of hearings. But when you get into where it's kind of this clear and objective, as statute calls it, where you're going down a checklist and whether it meets it or not, then it doesn't make a lot of sense. All of these projects do still have what we call a discretionary option, where if they're not meeting that checklist, a developer can always choose to go through a hearing process to do something they think is better or out of the box. There's always that option available.
Thank you. I just wanted you to note that state law, and I want the public to know that we may ask, the city is working very hard to pay attention to legislation that would further decrease the city's role in how a city's neighborhoods look.
And really reduce not only the process, but reduce the amount of standards. We've been very thoughtful about the standards, and those standards that can be impactful and help make Wilsonville the great community it is. But there's a lot of interest of removing and not really acknowledging those standards that is really worrisome.
There's outside pressure for that.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I have a question on your slide. The class 2 for buildings over 6 units, is there an upper end?
Well, really not, but physically they don't make buildings that big typically. So there's not an upper.
I'm thinking like an apartment complex.
So, and we'll get this to the next slide. This class 2 for an individual building, right? You're not talking about we're not talking about approving all of like Joy Trail through administrative process. The actual development and like the site planning and everything still goes through the DRB. It's just the vertical construction of the building and the immediate surrounding landscaping is what would be administrative. And maybe I can go ahead and go to the next slide to kind of illustrate that a
sorry.
bit more.
I wonder if, before we go to this, though, I'm just thinking through that notice that's on the class, too. Is that okay? Or should we loop back?
No, that's fine.
Because that is, I hear what you're saying about setting up like false expectations for the public, that it's a choose your own adventure, right, at the point when we're reviewing an application, where in fact, what we're reviewing is, did it meet the standards that we've agreed on before, right? So when we do that notice to the public, what does that notice look like, and how is that explained in a notice? Because I'm wondering if the notice could still continue to kind of set up this false expectation.
Yeah, the notice could, if it's done incorrectly, saying, we want your feedback on this project, essentially. But I think I think we can do better, and we have the ability to do better on that sort of notice where it is something that is kind of clear and objective, where set it up is, this is what it's about. It's more a quality control sort of question we're asking the public. Please look at these standards, making sure we're not missing something that is going to impact your property, making sure the city's not just glossing over something, essentially.
Like direct them to, these are the standards that have been applied in this instance, or something
Which technically
like that.
the notices do that, but it's kind of in legalese a bit.
You gotta
and
make it understandable.
I think making that component of it more understandable is a growth opportunity.
Okay. Just
Thank
wanted
you.
to think that through. Sorry, go ahead.
No,
And
we
then
all,
go ahead
I
to the
took some
larger.
time on that, I'm sorry, but I did want, and the name of the game in this legislative session is this kind of topic, and so we're working on it. Now, with 5 or so minutes left, what do we need to really dig into?
I guess the question is, are we on track? Are there particularly on this one, because I think this is, we can cover the other topic at another work session, the other topic I have listed here. And I think just first of all, are we on the right track for the design standards for Main Street? I'm kind of hearing yes.
Yeah.
But particularly, let's circle back to this multifamily. I know this is pretty major change, a fairly substantial policy for the city. So just want to get any policy direction or any additional information you need on this before kind of gearing this up for potential final adoption.
What's our process for final adoption?
So this would come back in a package for a final work session, probably one more time, as kind of a larger package for the code updates for Frog Pond East and South, and then it'd go through a citywide notice and ordinance adoption after that.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to butt in on the question before about the larger multifamily. So if we want to circle back to that, I didn't mean to
The larger
hijack this. Yeah.
Yeah, for an individual building, I think it's kind of the scale of the building that you're really not going to get that big a multifamily without mixed use. And even so, all those standards, we have to think if we're ever going to get a 5, 6, 7-story building in town center, is that going to go through this process or not? I guess that's a valid question. Should there be an upper threshold where, if it's more than 3 or 4 stories tall, we still want a public, but, at what point does it get beyond those standards?
So does the council want to spend more time on that, which we really could at another meeting on this?
I would like to. I would actually like to carry forward.
Okay. And are there any specific information then that you'd like staff to come back to on this?
I think come back and answer the questions that we asked today, if you'll circle back with us on those,
Okay.
on the open items. And then, are we going to review the multifamily review process today, or would that be at the follow-on?
I mean, we're short on time here. We've kind of talked through, if you have any comments or direction on it, all that I'm showing on this slide is the shift. And I want to be clear that, because the questions come up, we're not talking about approving an entire subdivision of multifamily or a large complex like some of the larger apartment complexes, all administratively. You'd still look at the functional layout, the stage 2 for our former DRB members, the tentative plat, if there's any platting involved, and the design of required open space would all still go through the DRB process. But it's those construction of the individual buildings and the architecture of those buildings that then would be an administrative process.
That's the process that you've outlined right here.
Yeah,
That's what's under discussion.
right. So current and then proposed.
Right. So there's nothing new to come back.
But maybe our future, I just want to see if the other counselors are, if I'm hearing what you're hearing as an interest, is a meeting where we take more time on what we are changing from and what we are going to and why. And I understand it, I just want to make sure we have some of that in writing so our DRB members and our interested public can understand.
Yeah.
We just take a little bit more time on that.
Yeah.
Does that sound?
That sounds good. And I would really like to understand the logic behind the separation of architectural design of buildings and design of landscaping, not part of the required open space. Why that's being split apart from where in the past it was part of the DRB review.
So the simplest answer to that is that's consistent with single-family and middle housing. So like a single-family home, the DRB is still reviewing the subdivision. If there's any parks, like small parks as part of that subdivision, the DRB is reviewing that as part of site design review. But then they're not reviewing the landscaping on the individual lot or the individual home. So it's essentially shifting to where multifamily is kind of at that same level.
Got it.
So you're.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, my only, thought is, what defines required open space?
That's specific in the
It's very
code.
specific?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a very specific
Very good.
requirement in the code.
Okay, good.
This
Thank
is
you.
actually at the
Question.
table.
Thank you, Mr. Pauly.
Thank you for the discussion.
And now we will move to discussing the next conversation on prohibited camping code update project with our city attorney, Ms. Guile Hinman. And we have until about 6:20 for this. But we have more opportunities coming ahead.
Not many.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Amanda Guile Hinman, City Attorney. So tonight, we're here yet again to talk about prohibited camping, our code update project. Tonight, before you in your council packet, and what we'll be discussing are further updates to the draft code, new draft administrative rules, and value statements. And as part of the administrative rules, we've further refined the aerial map that we've been discussing as the designated area for where camping will be allowed, subject to the time, place, and manner regulations. So for tonight's discussion, I'm again going to just do a quick overview of the background, why we're here, why we're discussing this. Then I'm going to give a brief update on the changes to the code that are in your council packet, and then go over the aerial map. We'll spend some time on the draft administrative rules and the draft value statements, and then talk about next steps. So as a background, and as the council knows, the reason that we're all here started with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision in Martin v. Boise. That Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision applies to 9 different states, including the state of Oregon. And essentially what that case involved was a a homeless person was cited under the City of Boise's prohibited camping ordinance that banned camping on public property. And that person alleged that because there was no place for them to go, no shelter bed available to them, that they were being punished because of their status as a homeless person, which is a violation of their 8th Amendment right against cruel and unusual punishment. The Ninth Circuit agreed and said that when there are not enough shelter beds available in a community, that a person cannot be punished for being homeless. So they used the language of an individual who is involuntarily homeless, meaning they have no shelter bed or place to go to. After that decision, another court case came out of the Oregon Federal District Court, which is Blake v. Grants Pass. What Grants Pass had done was essentially take that Martin v. Boise decision and just take out the word sleeping from all its regulations, but otherwise kept in all of its prohibited camping regulations. And the Oregon Federal District Court said that isn't sufficient, that people need to have the ability to make minimal efforts to stay warm and dry. So having rudimentary materials such as blankets or tarps or tents, tents is kind of touchy, but that they need to be able to stay warm and dry. That decision was affirmed by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So again, that decision now applies to all of the jurisdictions that fall under the Ninth Circuit. But during all of that, while the Blake and Johnson cases were going on, the state legislature passed House Bill 3115 and 3124. And House Bill 3115 is really the reason that we're doing this code update. We essentially, because our code does not comply with the Martin v. Boise decision, we have not been enforcing our prohibited camping regulations since at least that time. But what House Bill 3115 does is it takes that Martin v. Boise decision, makes it now state law, where we can not outright ban camping, but we can have reasonable time, place, and manner regulations. Those have to be in place by July 1, or else we are subject to being sued just for the mere fact of having non-compliant laws. So even though we're not enforcing them, by merely having them on our books, we are subject to a lawsuit potentially if we don't have something in place by July 1. So with that background, I'm just briefly going to go over the code updates, and these are the updates since our last work session on March 20th. So some of the updates that you'll see, they're marked as revisions in your council packet as attachment A. We added some definitions, particularly defining what a designated area is. And I also included individuals who are involuntarily homeless and worked that language throughout the code update. In the event that there is ever a time where we may have enough shelter beds, then there is a mechanism to say that this only would apply if there aren't enough shelter beds. So it kind of gives us some wiggle room if at some point in time we do have enough emergency or transitional housing for unsheltered individuals. So one of the things that I did want to highlight though is so basically how we've divided up the regulations is to say, you can't camp anywhere. You can't camp for survival anywhere except in our designated areas. But to reiterate, I think both for individuals who are experiencing homelessness and our community, to say what we truly do mean nowhere except our designated areas is, you'll see the language, and I think this is on page 85 of your packet. We specifically said, including but not limited to all these places. So it's absolutely nowhere except the designated areas, but to reiterate, it's not our parks, it's not on our right-of-ways, it's so not any public buildings or facilities or structures that aren't these designated areas. So we wanted to just really hone in and reiterate, because there was a lot of questions, even amongst staff, of, well, can people go here or there? So to reiterate that basically you can't go anywhere except the designated areas. We took out the camping stove regulation that we had discussed last time. We added in that there's no allowance of using tobacco products, cannabis products, alcohol, or controlled substances, except for the appropriate use of a medication. And I want to just highlight, because there may be some confusion about controlled substances, because of Oregon's decriminalization of marijuana, cannabis has been pulled out of how Oregon defines controlled substances. So that's why it's separately called out from other controlled substances as an unallowed use on city property for these regulations. We also added in that the city manager or designee can temporarily designate additional areas until the next regularly scheduled council meeting. And the reason we did that is because, as you'll see from the aerial map, we only right now, as it's currently drafted, there's only 9 designated vehicle camping spots and potentially 9 non-vehicle camping spots. And there may come a time where, you know, a police officer interacts with somebody who needs to go somewhere and those 9 spaces are filled. We need to not violate the law, we need to be able to say you can go here. But we do want that any long-term expansion to be vetted through the council. So that's why it gives us this ability to make sure we don't violate the law, but also that council can come back and either ratify the expansion or, you know, make an adjustment as needed. And then I did want to note, because we did make an additional change to the parks regulations in light of taking out the removal of cooking stoves. I wanted to make sure we were consistent with how parks talks about fires. And what we realized is that our parks regulations really aren't reflective of how we handle fires in our city parks. They're only allowed through a permit, an event permit that you would get. So we changed the parks regulations for that consistency. So getting to the aerial map, so what we did was some of the public works staff and I went and walked the City Hall parking lot and looked at where we thought we would be the best locations for initially identifying some parking spots for non-vehicle camping. Originally, if you remember the circles that we had done, there were circles that were on the westernmost part of the property. We ended up deciding that probably initially the designated areas shouldn't be right next to private commercial property. So that's why you see it next to Courtside Drive instead of on that westernmost side. So what we are anticipating doing, subject to council's approval, is those 7 parking spots along Courtside Drive would be the first places people would go. They would each be separated by a parking spot. Now, we don't anticipate that anyone, like city staff's not going to park in one of those parking spots, but for law enforcement and code compliance, when anyone's trying to make contact with individuals, it would be safer to have some type of buffer in between vehicles when they're approaching. So we wanted to make sure that there was some space in between. So that's why we did the every other one. So initial 7 and then the 2 overflow parking spots as sort of the initial locations. You'll see the red boxes where we're looking at still providing some sanitation services, like a porta potty and additional garbage receptacle. So the idea with this, and as we talk about non-vehicle camping, is we really want to ground truth what's going on before we talk about expanding into either additional parking spaces in City Hall or elsewhere, because, you know, anecdotally, we have heard that there are actually very few residents in Wilsonville who are homeless, either living in their vehicles or living outdoors. And so until we can say that we actually need more space, it doesn't really make sense to designate more space. I will say I've reached out about the point-in-time count that was recently done in January and February. It's not done yet because they're doing it regionally, but there should be some data that we can get about the point-in-time counts once they're published. So, then if looking to the north side of north of City Hall, what we did is I had our GIS staff do a measurement from the back yard, the property line on the other side of Town Center Loop to the property line of our property on the west side of Town Center Loop East. And that's about approximately 100 feet. Then we did an additional setback of 10 feet, which is the red dotted line, and another 20-foot setback, which is the black dotted line. The largest setback that we have in our code is 20 feet, so that's kind of what we went off of. If you keep the same 100-foot distance that we've generally been talking about in our code, at a 10-foot setback, that'd be 10 occupants, and at a 20-foot setback, it'd be 9 occupants. If council is interested in not opening up that entire area of land, one of the things that I would suggest we do is maybe look at a smaller than 100-foot distance between, so we're not limiting to only 3 or 4 individuals who could be on the site. And another thing that I will note that staff is talking about is the property to the north is private property, even though it's vacant, it is private property. So we've discussed putting up some fencing along that to make sure that we're not encouraging trespassing onto that property. And then we've also talked about some vegetative screening along Town Center Loop East for, since we have residences across the street, the backyards of residences across the street. So that's what we're looking at, right? This is the latest iteration, but yeah, I'm happy to take some comments on it.
So just to leave time, make sure that we leave time to talk about the values at the end. I'm going to try to be really concise and ask each counselor to be very concise in their questions. I'm interested in, I just wanted to reiterate that, as we've said in our earlier meetings, it's important that this legal description that we're talking about, which is required, is taken in the context of our commitment to working with Clackamas County, which is heavily funded by the taxpayers in Wilsonville and throughout Clackamas County, through the supportive services measure and also the housing bond. And we've had that nice visit from Clackamas County to hear about it. We're going to meet with them later to really find out how this will really work and what else do we need to enable the daily visits by social services personnel about how to connect them to services. So with that in mind, and also the discussion that we've had about how dispersed persons, where it's harder to connect with them, or, so this helps with not having people dispersed all over different areas. It seems to me that we're better off having, concentrating toward where the sanitation services are, and so that the social services and any support services know who they're talking to every day, and there's more likelihood of being able to connect people to services to help them get on the exit ramp from homelessness. Thank you.
Yep. And I will just note, we're going to get into the administrative rules shortly, but there is one of the outreach components and education components that we have in the draft administrative rules is about county coordination. So I know that's been something we've talked about as part of council goals, and so we've reiterated that in the draft administrative rules.
I have a question. Unless I just read them really quickly, the parks and playgrounds rules and regulations do not speak to structures like putting up a tent or a lean-to or any of those things. So I'm wondering, in number 16, which is page 92 of our packet, where we spell out that an individual may rest as defined in the code, if that means they can put a tent up.
That's a great question. So one of the things that is a real challenge when parks are open, so as we've all discussed, parks will remain closed to everybody from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. as they are now. What we have to be mindful of is, what would you allow, we talk about what would you allow the soccer parent who's going there to watch their kid and it's a sunny day and they put up a sunshade. Like, how do you make the distinction between? So if you didn't want a tent, we would need to be very specific about what that is and what it is not, if we want to allow other, like canopies being put up or 3-sided tents being put up, that kind of thing. If that's something the council's interested in looking at, we can look at that. I will note for the rest, one of the things that we did put in about the rest was where even individuals who are just resting without a tent, where they cannot be, which is on the play structures or in the playground areas, on our sports fields or sport courts and the like.
Well,
so if council's interested in that, that's something we could bring language back about maybe regulating a 4 or 5-sided tent versus a 3-sided tent.
Well, I'm thinking, certainly the little the canopy things, those things happen a lot at soccer. The pop-up tents. And the other thing is that, people put their babies down for naps in some kind of a covered structure. And I don't think it's our intent to not allow that. But the question becomes if we have homeless persons who have to get up and get out of where they are at 7 o'clock in the morning, does that mean then they just move all of their whole structure over to one of the parks and stay there until 9 o'clock at night and then move back?
Well, and I will say, it also does come down to the definition of camping, because we do say there's no camping allowed at any point in time in the parks. That is in 16. So the definition of camping, or to camp or camping, means to set up or remain in or at a campsite for the purposes of establishing or maintaining a temporary place to shelter for survival from the elements. And then there's a definition of campsite. So it's not necessarily getting to being getting into the minutia of what is a tent versus, a sunshade or anything like that. But there is a way, if somebody has set up a campsite in the park during the day, we can regulate that currently with the way it's drafted right now.
Okay.
And is there one thing that we could look at is defining the sunshade as having no walls or no more than one, and the canopy, like for an infant, being the size of a toddler or less, or designed for a toddler?
Well, I know on I sat at many soccer fields many years. And sometimes those things have 3 walls because it is pouring down rain and the wind is blowing sideways.
So 3 sides.
So,
Yeah, and you get into the weird things of there's the mesh netting ones where they are on all sides plus the roof to keep out rain and all of that kind of stuff. So that's when it gets it gets difficult, but I could see also if there's some language that we could.
Maybe something about the visibility access, that it's not completely enclosed with no visibility access on.
Well, or even to say, reference back to what as defined as camping in Wilsonville Code 10.71010.
Yeah.
So structures not permitted would be as defined in the definition of camping or whatever. So it just strengthens it just a little bit.
I have a few questions, and I'll keep it concise, too. Okay. I promise, Mayor, that on page 85 of the council packet, you struck some of the more prescriptive language on residential plan development residential. Is that because it's already covered in the new language that you proposed?
Yeah, well, so originally, when we had talked about the issue of the rights-of-way, originally how it was drafted is there was going, as staff drafted it, that there would be some allowance for camping on rights-of-way. So we had only restricted in residentially zoned areas. Well, now 1C is all city rights-of-way and 1D is all city sidewalks. So we could put it in. Again, it's like a third redundancy. We could keep it in. But, I could say something like all city rights-of-way, including but not limited to residentially zoned.
Not that any individual who is camping is going to sit down and look at code before they park their car, but I'm just thinking if someone says, I'm going to get litigious, that we are as prescriptive as we possibly can be and maybe a little bit redundant, so that it's clear and it's not as open to potential interpretation for city rights of way.
Yeah.
And then I have one other question, and this is probably the one that I don't want to ask.
Okay.
I don't see any reference to what happens at the end of the 72-hour period. And I believe there's a reason we can't include that. Is that correct?
So
If, so 72 hours comes, there's a citation that's issued in the morning.
Yeah. And a notice that's given.
And the notice for the 72 hours, and it's very clear notice.
Yeah.
It's now hour 73,
Yeah.
and they leave.
Oh, okay,
And that night, they come back.
right. Yeah, it starts over.
It starts over.
It does start
Okay.
over. I thought you were going to say, in our administrative rules, we go through all the cleanup, all the removal and cleanup regulations are in our administrative rules. So those are in there, so if in hour 73, they've left items behind, we would take all of them.
But you go park at the I-5 rest area all day, and then that evening you come back.
Yeah.
I don't know if this helps or not, but I did talk with Adam Brown at Clackamas Housing Services about that kind of concept, and he, we can't predict everything that's going to happen every day from here to the end of eternity on interactions, but he responded that in the way that skilled, trained social services will be interacting with people, it was his opinion that that would be manageable. And then you can get into really difficult situations that have other problems too.
So will skilled services visit the camper once the 72-hour clock starts ticking?
We're actually required by state law to contact service providers.
Okay.
To come to anywhere where we do a notice, and we wouldn't even need the requirement of the state law as a city government, we would do that anyway, but it is required under state law for us
And the
to make
objective,
contact.
again, is not to bother someone, is to talk to somebody. As we've heard many, many times, it sometimes takes 6 or 8 times for this, proper conversation from a skilled social worker to develop trust with somebody who is not quite ready the first 3 or 4 times. We can't predict this is always going to happen, but the idea is that you develop trust and you start working out things, and our goal is to work with Clackamas County in the best way possible that's a daily thing.
Yeah, and my expectation is, from all of the reading that I've done, is if you've got someone that are times 6 and 7 and they're still refusing any movement forward, there's likely other things going on.
Right.
That are very likely illegal.
Yeah.
So maybe there's another way to
Another path. Yeah.
path that forward. Is that social worker or that representative going to then come from the county, or are we going to bring them, or are those in city resources?
Those are the in-county resources.
Okay, great.
So it's not necessary, it could be county staff, but I know they also contract with a lot of nonprofit service providers for some of the outreach, so, yeah. And the other thing that I will say, just because there's so many questions around this doesn't end with whatever work product the council ultimately adopts. I will say that separately from everything that the council looks at, we are developing sort of standard operating procedures, policies for staff. So we know, as we're working through it, as we're ground truthing this, that we are continuing to be responsive to what's actually going on, that this doesn't go without any sort of response or contact or anything like that.
Chance for further development and work with.
Yep.
And there's not an unlimited number of resources for all this, but there is a reasonable amount of resources. And so we have every intention to get these services.
In the interest of time, is there what, if any, further refinement would council like to see? So we do have another scheduled work session for the 17th plan. Is there any further refinement to this map that council would like to see?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, the parking lot to the south of Courtside Drive is fairly large, and it's going to be after hours when city halls close. So I'm wondering, can't we use that entire lot before we have to go across Courtside Drive to the north side of it in that space? Because I feel like the more we can confine it, the more we're going to have a sense of control. And, just visually having it expanded out, seeing unhoused people on both sides of the street, to me, just feels like then the problem's expanding.
Yeah, that's a policy question for council. One of the things that why we initially separated them was because of conflict between vehicle and non-vehicle campers, and we don't want to run the risk of liability of somebody in a vehicle hitting somebody who's camping not in a vehicle. So that's why we originally separated it, but if council wants it all contained on City Hall parking lot, that's something staff could map out
Yeah,
what
and
that would look like.
my concern about that, I think that's a really great point, by the way, Counselor. My only concern about that would be that 72-hour period. So we expand it, and then we have tents that are in areas where individuals may be parking, where you've got a camper who's chosen not to leave during that 72-hour period. And there's a
Or
bit of,
maybe there's less chance that they would stay because now they're in more of a confined area. I mean, that's another way to
it's a
look
great
at it.
question.
Is there a way to do some management of that space where vehicles would not be able to drive down around the corner?
We can
That's-
we can segregate off. If
Yeah.
this is something that you want,
I would like to start with that because I have a lot of optimism and faith in our coordination with Clackamas County Built for Zero.
I think it might be a good idea to say that that's your preference, but not rule out the other side of the street.
Yes.
Because if we find out that we have issues and there are safety concerns, I think you want us to have the flexibility to move the tent camping to the other side of the street and move it as far away from Courtside Drive as possible.
I agree.
Yeah.
And to me, that would be like a county or a city manager decision, like immediately, and then we take it back to the city council at the next meeting.
So I think if you just simply state that your desire is to try to see if we can figure out a way to maybe cordon off some of these areas in the parking lot for tent camping, and then, because there is some parking on the back row over there that's not designated.
So we're trying to stay away from the businesses on the west side, and we tried to stay away, so that, where you see the vehicles, kind of several vehicles in that south area, that's our corral, and we're trying to keep people away from that corral because we have city vehicles there, so.
But there's a big parking lot. I think
Yeah,
the point is
so
we
we could-
can figure out a way to make it work.
And at this point, we are aware, from everything that we know, the numbers of persons needing help with the fact that they are not living in a place meant for human habitation in Wilsonville is low and manageable.
Yeah.
Today.
Especially for non-vehicle
Today,
camping.
as far as we know, we don't have the best way of really knowing if that's correct. So a lot of this is going to be found when we start. And the level of social services brought to this, we hope it's daily. We haven't ever tried it. So perhaps if we've said we would start with the administrative rule, the city manager having the ability to use that other area. And we definitely, I assume we all want to make this safe. Number one, it has to be safe. So the vehicle traffic needs to not be able to.
And so the other thing is that these vehicle spaces are 11 feet deep, 8 feet wide, so they would not fit our 10 by 10 foot standard that we have for non-vehicle camping. So I guess my question is if I do it similar to the vehicle camping, meaning every other spot, and that's just what it is, we take out the regulations about size otherwise?
My
For me,
other concern is you also have clause in there that says an RV can take up to 3 spaces.
Correct.
So we could very quickly fill up those 9 spaces if what we find are RVs.
Yes. Yes.
well, to me, I like to start conservatively and have the city manager, if something comes up, have him have the authority to make adjustments, and then we bring it back to the city council at our next meeting, and we go step by step.
Well, Counselor, would you also want that fencing put up now anyway, just in preparation, so that you make that decision where you're ready to
I
go?
think we could turn on a dime on the fencing.
Okay, great.
So I think
Great.
your policy intent is to try to confine it to the City Hall parking lot. We hear you loud and clear. If we can logistically do that in a safe manner, then we will do that. If we don't think we can, we'll come back to you and tell you why we can't.
Yeah.
But I think, it's a pretty good-sized parking lot. The concerns I have are more related to who's going to be waking people up at, 6:45 a.m.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of logistical challenges and concerns with this. I mean, thankfully, I just want to repeat, we do not have a large homeless population in Wilsonville. So the extent of the problem here is not anywhere near Portland, Beaverton, or some of the other larger cities, so.
And we don't have experience with someone waking people up at 6:45 a.m. And so that is the challenge of something I'm acknowledging. That's not necessarily going to be easy to do.
Well, and there's also the weekends, there's also security at night, so there's a lot of logistical stuff that we're going to have to just work through.
Right, I agree, because in my own experience, when I was working in downtown Portland a few years ago, I watched the police officers and the officers on bikes try to clear out some of those campers that were still, that were just, they were camping on the street overnight, and they were told they had to leave. Some days it was easy, some days it wasn't.
Right.
And this is what we are faced with in North America.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
we're making a big effort with the other cities in Clackamas County and with Clackamas County to address it. And we'll talk about the letter we sent Clackamas County about that later.
So I will bring back another map, and then really on April 7th, so you'll have it in your council packet, but really on April 17th, if we want to be looking at since it's going to be in the administrative rules, you don't technically have to adopt it on May 1, but I think for the community to understand what we're doing, it makes sense for them to all go at the same time. So really on April 17th, it can change. We can change it after, but that's really where you're going to need to make a determination which way you want to go.
One thing I wanted to bring up, though, a question I have is we have a pretty in-depth meeting that I'm having with the city manager and a number of service providers after April 17th.
Yeah, we'll have more information, but I think that all just ties into logistical stuff that as we're going to talk about going forward.
Yeah, that's more the
This is
housing
more of just coming into compliance with the state laws and in the court ruling. Yeah.
I'm going to still have a concern about the only allowing both tent and vehicle camping, and then I'll put it to bed and defer to the rest of the
Well, this is the time to talk about it.
on this, because I'm concerned, if we have a camper that's coming in, because they're not all going to show up at 9 o'clock at night and play good and go to bed. You could have a camper that shows up at 2 o'clock in the morning. You could have a camper who's sleeping on the floor, has a small, whatever it is that they've chosen to stay at or been moved to. They may not have an obvious tent. You have a car parking not that far away from them, or an RV, and decides to move at 4 o'clock in the morning. You've got a mixture of individuals sleeping on a parking lot next to potentially individuals in vehicles. And I really want to make sure that we're thinking through the liability issue and the safety issue for those individuals who may be sleeping on the street, because these people will not have little pods. They're going to be sleeping in a tent. They may just be sleeping in a sleeping bag with a tarp over them, which is what you see in Portland. So I do get concerned about that.
I think you make a good point. And, you can have depending on what kind of demarcation or barriers you could put into disallow vehicles.
I share those concerns. We'll figure out if we can make it happen, like I said.
And if it does,
We don't have all
because
the answers right now.
if
but
it's
we'll
not possible to do it safely, we don't want to do it.
we wouldn't want to put anybody in jeopardy.
So let's see what might be possible, and I think I've heard the council say we want to try to focus in this area so that we can tend to it. It's closer to the porta potty, the refuse.
And I think the tent or the fence is a good idea if we are using that lot space. The fence is
That lot, yeah, we would use
absolutely a good move to have the fence.
I'm just going to very quickly go over the draft administrative rules. So the biggest thing, obviously, in the draft administrative rules is it will ultimately designate the space where individuals would be allowed to camp. And we are making them in the administrative rules, as council discussed, to add some flexibility, so that way when changes do need to be made, they can be made more quickly. I did also want to address for Councilor Dunwell, we did put in language about towing of vehicles that are abandoned. So
Appreciate that.
yeah, so basically it's, you can treat vehicles as abandoned and tow them according to the abandoned vehicle statutes and our local code if there's no evidence that they're lived in. So if they're lived in, we need to treat them under our camping regulations, but if it looks like they're abandoned, then you can treat them under the abandoned vehicle code. So it's not perfect, nothing in this is perfect, but it is something that we try
I
to
thought you did a
address.
fantastic job on all of
Yes,
this, by the
so I
way.
have a question on procedure, Mr. Cosgrove, because I want to spend some time on the values and finish this and give this adequate time to finish. Is there a possibility to move the council goal discussion later tonight?
We can also come back to this.
You mean
as
the
well.
value statement?
Well, we have the value statement for this.
No, the council's goals.
And then the next session.
We're coming back on this, so there's time for more discussion on this.
Okay, so we could talk about the value statement at the next meeting?
And the value statements are in your packets, so I basically took what the council discussion was and tried to refine
thought
it
it was
based on
very
that.
nice.
So,
I had no other questions, and I was good with the value statements, so others likely have questions and comments.
It was, even though I didn't give you those in writing, it was an excellent representation of kind of what all of my thoughts were, anyway, so.
I also appreciated the value. But I did have one thing that I kind of wanted to float with the rest of council, and maybe it's good if we have a little time to think on that. I wondered if we wanted to add one bullet on this value statement, something that would acknowledge, I guess all of this is focused on response to when a person is experiencing homelessness, at that point in time, right? It's response to that point in time. And I wondered if we wanted to have a bullet that talks about all of the many things that the city does and engages in so many different departments, in the library, in Parks and Rec, in planning, in economic development, all of the things that we do to try and create a community where there's opportunity to thrive and opportunity to have stability and kind of support prevention of homelessness too. Like our equitable housing plan, looking at housing that responds to housing needs, the actual housing needs of the community. Things like our smart transit services, things that we do through economic development to provide employment opportunities in the city, just how we try and facilitate the wellness of our community members.
I like that.
Because this work, it's all interwoven, it's all combined with so many facets, right?
I agree. I really appreciate that, and I know that could be a really long value, but maybe you've done a great job with this. And could there potentially, I'm sorry, I don't have the wording for you right now, but I would like to, before the next meeting, talk to Adam Brown at Clackamas County and talk with him about this and see if he has anything to add that would reflect their approach, as we heard in our work session, about what they're doing is working to get people experiencing homelessness into off of the, out of that way of living and into a more healthy way of living. That's what we want.
Are you proposing then that we actually add that to the value statement?
Yes.
To promote getting
Right.
people into.
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
Isn't that kind of,
yeah, I was going to say, is
What we
it
put in
something
number
different
5?
than number 5? Yeah.
It is. I think it is. I just want to talk with him and see if I'd like to get his feedback.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. And then, so just for next steps, so we have the April 17th work session, and I actually think we did extend the time for it, so we'll have then what was originally planned, so we'll have more time. But I will bring everything to you as the draft packet of what you'd see on May 1, so you can kind of see it all together and what that looks like. So you'd have a draft ordinance, and the findings have been drafted, and they're being vetted through staff right now, so you'll see the findings and all of that with the code and administrative rules. We have the May 1 and May 15 council meetings for consideration, and then potentially the July 1 effective date. And I did really quickly want to say, I was talking with our code compliance coordinator, and he does, when people are violating our parking rules, he has this nifty little brochure that he hands out that's our parking guide, and on the front flap it has, like, he can just circle which rule they're violating, and then he puts it under their on their car windshield. But it's kind of nice because it's a did you know rather than hey, you're violating our code. So I'm going to pass one out to each of you so you can see it, but these are the kind of things that we're looking at as a staff of tools that we can have to help educate people on what our regulations will be. And then also, this is Brenda Evans. She's our behavioral health coordinator through the specialist through the sheriff's office, through and on the back of her business card, she has several numbers that are applicable to the resources that she interacts with. Not that we would do all of these, but what we're talking about doing is having something like a card that we can hand out. You know, it'll be at the library, community center, city hall, anywhere and everywhere, where individuals, both staff and community members, could have them to say, like, oh, I'm seeing somebody in distress. Who do I call? And it would have that information on there. So these are kind of some of the tools that we're talking about as a staff of creating as we start getting towards the implementation phase.
And we can also give something, as we heard from Clackamas County, give people experiencing distress direct connection to Clackamas County Housing Services if they're ready to talk with them.
Exactly.
And I just have one edit on number 5. Okay. And I had to make it on mine when I was redoing and kind of rewriting, but on the very last sentence, after the built for 0 comma, with the goal that all unhoused people be afforded options for safer, stable housing, because we're not doing everybody.
Right. Okay.
Good catch.
Do I need to turn off my screen for?
Thank you for your work on this, and to all of the staff and to the council.
Thank you. And I'll pass these out so you all have.
Okay, thank you. And that brings us to our last item for the work session, which is our council retreat follow-up and council goals confirmation. Who's going to lead this?
You.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right on our screen.
Oh, here she is.
Mm-hmm.
We're ready for our discussion if the audio is working.
Can you guys hear me? Yes. Are you guys ready?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, there was a weird audio issue. I couldn't hear for a moment. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. It's nice to be able to present the draft of the City Council goals that we worked on last month, or back in February. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to just take us back through a refresh of our process and where the goals landed after we did some refinement with staff. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so just briefly, we'll talk about the process we went through to arrive at the goals, and then do a quick review of the goals, and then talk about the next steps. So the council convened back in February. We had some team building the evening before with just the council and some of the a few members of the leadership team, and then started our day with some team building activities, and got into working on the council goals. So to lead up to the council goal retreat, we did some outreach with both the council and staff to understand what the desired outcomes were. So we gathered with these goals in mind, making sure that we identified some city council goals that will guide the development of the work plan and budget to align with both staff capacity and available resources. In order to develop those goals, we did some context setting to start, which is building that shared understanding of the community and organizational context to help inform the discussion. And then finally make sure that we had a strong and cohesive team with council and staff to move the goals forward. So that context setting that I mentioned, we did a review of the progress of the 2021 goals so that you all knew where those stood and had an understanding of which ones maybe were still ongoing or needed to be refined. Staff shared some updates about work that was in the pipeline. We also considered the input from the city boards and commissions. They had gathered last May to share just some updates on the work that they're doing and provide some input to the council. So that was considered at the workshop as well. And then we had just a general discussion of some political, economic, organizational, and other environmental factors for the council to consider as you all began to think about what goals needed to be set for the next 2 years. So where we arrived, I'll just take you quickly through the goals, and then we can have some discussion if they need any additional refinement. So keeping that vision in mind of Wilsonville being a clean, green, and safe community for all, and keeping these values in mind, these are the lens through which staff and the council implement the goals and consider the goals. So those values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, economic opportunity, environment, and safety. These are things that overlay into all of the goals and serve as that implementation lens. So we just briefly talked about those and reaffirmed them. We ended up with 6 goals at the end of the workshop, and so these are improve the city's emergency preparedness and public safety, protect and preserve Wilsonville's environment, attract high-quality industry and support economic opportunity for all in Wilsonville, increase housing opportunities for all and reach functional zero homelessness, expand Wilsonville's parks and facilities to align with community growth and needs, and then last, enhance communications and engagement to build a more connected community. So under each of these goals, we identified some actions that staff has assigned. So in your packet, you saw a more detailed list of how these goals have been refined and who they've been assigned to, as well as the timelines that staff is proposing. But there are actions to help move these things forward. So under emergency preparedness and public safety, there were 4 actions. We talked about developing that infrastructure resiliency plan and reprioritizing and funding the recommended projects, expanding support for individual emergency preparedness, conducting short-term planning for a police facility, and then completing a police department staffing study. So 4 actions under that goal. And I just want to pause here for a moment to see if there's any questions or additional refinements that are needed in this area. I don't know if it's the audio or if we can just keep moving, but
I'm good.
Stop me if it's the audio. Okay, good. The next one, under Protect and Preserve Wilsonville's Environment, we identified 2 actions, which is develop the climate inventory and gap analysis of city practices and operations, and then conduct some community education campaigns to build awareness of climate-friendly practices. So we talked about starting there for some of the environmental actions, and those were the 2 that we had listed there. Any questions about those?
Nope.
I have a quick question. So the strategy actions, was that, I can't remember because we did the goals, 6 weeks ago or whatever. Strategies and actions, is that something the staff put together, or was that something that we talked about at the meeting, at the retreat?
Yeah, great question. It was, most of these are ones that you guys talked about at the retreat and provided input on, and then working with staff, we refined the language to make sure that it felt actionable and provided a clear action statement. So that was some of the refinement that happened with the leadership team following the retreat. But this was the work that you guys did in your small groups, and then we had as a large group discussion, trying to understand, the intent behind some of those outcomes that you were identifying.
Thank you, that helped.
Great. The next goal area, so attract high-quality industry and support economic opportunity for all in Wilsonville. 4 actions here. The first, to develop a strike fund to pursue development opportunities for the high-value properties aligned with the city's economic development goals. Prioritize and implement recommendations of the Urban Renewal Strategic Plan. Facilitate connections between industry and education partners. And then convene a child care partner consortium to understand the barriers, challenges, and opportunities for increasing child care opportunities in Wilsonville. And this is even more specifically is considering the city's role and potential actions for supporting the outcomes of that partner conversation. So those were the 4 actions there. In the next goal area around housing, we had 3 actions identified, which was to prioritize and implement the Equitable Housing Strategic Plan, to train city staff and work with partners to better serve the houseless population through the creation of an internal task force, and then last, to adopt ordinances to bring the city into compliance with state and circuit court rules. The next goal area and action and corresponding actions. So this one was around parks and facilities, and I understand you guys had a work session discussion following the retreat to provide some more clarity on this. So using that input, we worked with staff to refine some of these actions. So the first being to review and prioritize the park and facility projects, and then recommend a funding plan and timeline. The next one is to complete the community service block master plan. And then last, review and update the park project prioritization through the Parks and Recreation Board. And then the last goal area was around enhancing communications and engagement to build a more connected community. So there were 2 actions identified here. First being to increase capacity to support communications and engagement through tools including marketing, social media, bilingual outreach, youth outreach partnerships, and others. So you guys have shared many ideas for how to increase capacity to improve communications and engagement. And so all of those notes are captured in that action area. And then the last one here, 18, it would be to conduct an increased citizen and neighborhood engagement for community safety. It also kind of ties back to that first goal area around emergency preparedness as well. So those were the 6 goals, 18 actions that you identified. The next, at this point, we just want to get confirmation from the council to make sure that this reflects the desired goals that you want to see move forward for the next 2 years, and see if there's any additional comments or direction that you'd like to provide. Following this conversation tonight, I believe you have an item on your council agenda, meeting agenda next, to approve the goals as amended maybe during this work session, and then we'll get a final summary document prepared that you can share with the community, with the public, and get you ready to celebrate that good work and implement it and get moving on it. So I'd like to just stop and pause and see if there's any questions or additional refinements the council would like to see to the proposed goals.
Well, I have a question. I guess it's mostly for my colleagues. The council and individual members of the council are spending quite a bit of time addressing issues related to airport expansion tolling, the issues of preservation of farmland and overall transportation, and as it relates to diversion and some of those other things. And none of that work seems to be reflected in our goals. And so I'm wondering if we shouldn't recognize the work that is being done by the council as well as by staff, because I think Mark is intimately involved in most, if not all of those particular items, and I don't see any of them showing up in our goals, so.
They're in your legislative priorities?
But I'm wondering if our goals should not be driven to a degree by the council goals. The legislative priorities shouldn't be somehow derived from our council goals.
Coordinated.
Or reaffirmed, sure.
But these are specific goals that you're going to accomplish in the next 2 years.
But I think some of them could show up in, for instance, protecting and preserving Wilsonville's environment. A number of them could relate specifically to that, so that we would continue, the strategy might be to continue and focus on preservation of
Protection.
transportation, impacts of, and it could be anything that's coming down the road. I mean, we don't have to specify.
Sure. Yeah,
totally,
we can throw some language in there that draws attention to it, but it won't be a goal. It would just be a melding of your legislative priorities into your goal language, just to say that you would like to focus on these specific issues, unless there's something specific that you intend to accomplish in the next 2 years.
Well, we did have, in the last set of goals, I believe we had identifying the impact, recognizing the airport in our comprehensive plan as an area of special concern.
That was
specific thing.
Exactly. So if there's something specific, yes.
There's always a changing landscape as to what we need to do with regard to, so perhaps this goal of continue, what you could say is on the strategies, continue to monitor and take action when needed to protect the environmental health of our rivers and air, so. What do you think?
I guess I understand what you're saying, but in terms of a goal, something that's specific, measurable, timely, something that you're going to do in the next 2 years that you can point back to and say, we did this.
If we identify something specific, we can
Yes.
vote to do it. So this does
Correct.
not preclude us. A particular problem comes up, as it has in the last 20 years. When that arises, we can make a resolution to take action,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, I would just ask Sarah, I mean, what could we put in there in terms of language under that section?
Yeah, I think the language that's has been proposed so far. Again, one of the things that we wanted to encourage this year, just based on the outreach we heard from the council, is making sure that these things were measurable, and so like continuing to monitor is something that staff is going to do on an ongoing basis anyway. So I think the mayor's comment about you could, if something were to come up that you were reacting to specifically, at that point, staff would be keeping an eye on those things and you would take action. It wouldn't necessarily have to be in your goals, but this is something that allows staff to build the budget and allocate staff capacity. So I'm not sure if you have it in your values that your environment is important to you. You have it in your vision statement. So unless there's something specific that you want to put in the actions, I'm not sure that it aligns with the other language that you have in there. But you certainly, they're your goals, so you could put something in there. It's going to be hard to report progress on that.
Well, it seems to me that we could be general enough to say that we would continue to focus legislative priorities and council activities around issues that arise that might impact Wilsonville's environment, or, something so that if something arises, we've done something about it.
Could it be, make an annual assessment of actions needed? I mean, we do have that identified in our values,
Right.
and we do have it in our,
I think it's all covered in your legislative priorities that we care about south of the river, we care about tolling, we care about homelessness. I mean, those are all, unless there's something specific that we're going to do.
codified in that
yeah,
which
the
we
next
have
2 years.
approved.
But these are your goals. If there's some language that we could include that would get to what Councilor Linville's getting at, I'm happy to include it. And I think what you could do is you could adopt the goals tonight, and then you could allow me to work with Mark and Greg Leo to figure out what we could put in there. Something that we could, I mean, because you mentioned tolling, you mentioned the airport, you mentioned south of the river, so.
And the impacts of diversion.
Maybe the annual, the time-sensitive aspect of this could be,
I'm struggling with this too.
Before the end of December, before the end of November, identify any changes necessary to the legislative priorities to assure we are adequately addressing sensitivities regarding highway transportation, impacts of the airport.
I feel like it's a hard one because this isn't a point-in-time thing. Like, transportation has always been important for Wilsonville and always will be important for Wilsonville. And I guess what we're talking, like, we're saying we want to be aware, but it's also beyond just saying we want to be aware. We want staff to be aware because we want that communication to be happening back to council too, as staff is monitoring, right? But we also want a seat at the table, at the appropriate tables, and we want to be well represented on these issues that come up. So maybe it's something about the representation is happening in critical topics as identified by our legislative priorities or something like that. And how we measure it is we have attended these discussions, we have sent these letters, we have made this testimony on the state level, and those are like more tangible things that show our engagement on those topics that will always be they're always going to be like, a large part of our work. You're saying we spend a lot of time on this? We do. We really do, because it's always important.
I've been here for 12 years. The airport, I-5, and Charbonneau, or French Prairie, have consistently been issues, and long before I got here. How we've dealt with it is in our legislative priorities.
Yeah, I hear you there.
Well, with the exception of what the mayor said, is that we did have an actionable thing to do related to the airport, which is amending our comprehensive plan. But if there's something specific, we could add that.
I really hear what Councilor Linville's saying, though, and maybe there isn't the perfect language to build into the goals, but when you think about some of the greatest challenges we have in front of us in the next 18, 24 months, you're talking about the chip bill, some of the challenges that we've, some of our issues with transportation more specifically, but also some of the land use challenges that you're right, and they're very likely handled through legislative, but they percolate, and then all of a sudden it's like, we have to tackle this.
That's another.
Yeah, is there something we can build into the goal, which is a structured, that we're building a strategy for structured reporting out on status of this, or is that too operational or tactical?
It seems operational to me because we do it already. We report back on any legislative item. I mean, you've all been engaged in various legislative activities for the city. The mayor testifies and weighs in on letters, and if there's something specific, let me think about it. I'm on the spot right now. I can't think of something specific.
I think we've given you the
I
idea.
can bring it back. I'll try and wordsmith something that I think gets to what Councilor Linville's trying to say.
Okay, and I have something else that maybe you were going to say this, Councilor Linville, but What about another topic that I want to make sure it's covered in I know it's in our values, and that is our support of not only under the category of attract high-quality industry and support economic opportunity for all in Wilsonville. So we have that in there.
Right.
Councillor Linville and Councillor Berry and I spent about 3 hours today with the president of Oregon Institute of Technology and many of his staff.
5.
Was it 5 hours? It was fascinating. It was wonderful. And we talked about schools. We talked about our Westland Wilsonville schools. We talked about other businesses in town, the community colleges. And while we don't run school, we do have our, support an excellent school system in our values, I think. But there might be a strategy that should be listed regarding developing new and strategic methods to optimize the city, school, and employment nexus.
Business education and government.
So you guys do have an action in there, and it was around facilitating connections between industry and education partners.
There it is.
So thinking about, just to refresh your memories, it was about the city serving as that facilitator, that connector. Yeah.
Okay, we're 1 and 1. No, it's
Okay.
very good. Thank you so I think we've heard, Councillor Berry, did you want to add anything?
I understand your point that we have our legislative actions that we're focusing in on, but these are our goals, and it just seems, I agree that it seems like if we're doing all this work, it should be mentioned somehow in our goals, so that at the end of the year, we can say, not only did we work on these things, but here's some of the things we accomplished. So
I'm not
like to see
disagreeing
the
with
tie.
anybody
Yeah.
on council. I just want to make that clear. I'm just struggling with what I can put in there.
To me, it just makes sense if
Yeah.
we can kind of tie that together.
I will do my level best.
I know you will.
He really will.
I will, I promise.
Okay, thank
Sorry,
you.
Sarah.
I think that, Sarah, thank you very much for your work on that, and it sounds like you're going to be getting a call from the city manager.
No, I think I'm going to take this one for the team, Sarah. I'll work with Mr. Ottenod and we'll figure it out.
All right.
Okay.
Your work is done, thank you.
Just getting an email, it's going to be really easy. So thank you very much.
Yes,
thank
Brian,
you.
please send me the update, and we'll get your summary report all ready for you.
Right.
So
You did a
you
great
guys can
job.
package that and have it for the community and for yourselves. And I wish you all the best as you begin the implementation of your goals, and please keep us informed if we can support you in any way.
All right, thanks for all your work guiding our discernment there. And we'll,
Sarah, how long
Of
before
course.
your maternity leave?
End of July. So, yes, looking
Best
forward
wishes.
to welcoming this new addition. So thanks for asking.
all right, congratulations, and thank you again for partnering with us.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, ladies. Have a good evening.
All right, thank you. That concludes our work session, and we'll reconvene at 7:10.
How much time do you need? 2 minutes. You can probably do it in 7:01.
Can we use a bathroom facility break there?
You know what?
thinking you were taking notes.
Well, I'll do something brief, maybe just think of one, just during the thing, think of some feature. Okay. I don't know that okay. I'll call to order a meeting of the Wilsonville City Council on Monday, April 3rd at 7:08 p.m. Will the city recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Berry.
Present.
Councillor Linville.
Here.
Council President Ockervall.
Here.
Councillor Dunwell.
Here.
Mayor Fitzgerald.
Here. Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to ask our council president to make a motion to approve the following order of agenda.
Your Honor, I move to approve the following order of agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. I'm going to start with mayor's business and make it brief. One of the things that Councillor Linville and Councillor Berry and I had the privilege of doing today was spending, I think, about 5 hours at Oregon Institute of Technology. And we talked a lot about some really exciting opportunities for not only, for all educational institutions and businesses to find ways to make even greater progress than the city of Wilsonville has up until now in building a strong and diverse economic base and a place of great education. We already have a lot to be proud of here, and we have a private sector payroll now of more than $1.5 billion. And some of the ideas we talked about today, I think, could be really great for the future. And I think my fellow councilors might have some other comments to say about that. But also, Oregon Institute of Technology happens to be celebrating its 75th anniversary this year, and we'll hear more about that in May. A couple of the things that I've done in the last couple of weeks that I want to update the rest of the council on is on March 20th, Councillor Dunwell and I had the opportunity to meet with and welcome the Philippine Consul Generals of Oregon and of San Francisco. We had a great meeting with them. They brought in a number of representatives from the business sector and the American Filipino community, their Chamber of Commerce, and other cultural and business organizations. And so it was a good opportunity to learn some of the accomplishments that they are working on together and some ways that the city of Wilsonville can help welcome them to make greater progress in the areas of interest. On April 3rd, excuse me, I already covered that one. Today we talked further about, at our work session, we spent more time talking about the required changes to our prohibited camping code. There's a lot still to be done on that topic, but it gets into the area of what are some resources available in Clackamas County to help people who are experiencing homelessness, to get them off the street or off, into a place that is meant for human habitation. Clackamas County is the entity that all of the cities in Wilsonville really depend on for that. They have those resources. And today, several mayors and I, Mayor Lisa Beatty from Milwaukee, Mayor Rosie Bilatoski from West Lynn, Mayor Frank Bubenik from Tualatin, Mayor Joe Buck from Lake Oswego, and Mayor Denise McGriff from Oregon City, as well as Mayor Michael Milch from Gladstone, all sent a letter to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioner Chair, Tootie Smith. We also addressed it to Commissioner Mark Shull and Commissioner Ben West, and we essentially let them them know how much we applauded the work of our Clackamas County Housing Services staff in securing resources and developing a really good response to this problem. They have actually visited the city of Wilsonville, as you can read about that on our website. But the letter was really recognizing that we also appreciate the work that Clackamas County did in identifying a way to apply a grant from the legislature that is administered through Oregon Community Foundation called Project Turnkey. And this, you may have read about it. It's where entities can purchase a motel or hotel of a certain caliber that is in an appropriate location that could provide housing for some people experiencing homelessness. And there are lots of different ways that that particular housing can be programmed. Clackamas County actually identified the Comfort Suites on I-205 and voted to purchase that building and then begin to use dollars that have been contributed by taxpayers in Clackamas County, higher wage individuals, and also by businesses who have gross receipts of greater than $5 million. That was under a tax that was passed by the voters in 2020. It is now, that tax is generating $40 million annually for the county to use to develop and provide social services to help get people experiencing homelessness into the level of homelessness or housing that is best for them. And this is just one of the tools. So our letter was encouraging the commission to reconsider the fact that not only did they first vote to buy that building, and they had funds granted to them by the legislature to do so, and they also had programming funds available from the taxpayers, they then, Commissioner Chair Smith changed her vote, thereby making that purchase not possible. So our letter was asking them to go back and reconsider that, because we think it would be a very good tool for our whole county. And one step for about 100 persons experiencing 100 households could have a level of housing there that they now do not have. So we sent that letter off today. The legislature is very busy right now, and many of the bills that seem to be coming up are addressing how cities manage their plans to build houses and neighborhoods. Each city kind of has their own standards that have been developed over time, the way their neighborhoods look, the types of housing they want, the types of strategies they go through to decide about where and how they will build housing. And so there's a lot of work we're doing now to not only increase housing, because the state desperately needs more housing, but also to make sure that cities still have their own stake in how their housing and their neighborhoods will be built. So I appreciate the staff helping us continue to advocate for expanding housing and also keeping the spirit of our neighborhoods as we want. April 3rd is Arbor Day. We're going to do the Arbor Day proclamation. And I'm just going to go through find my other document on this. But do I have that written out? I see what happened. We had a little conflict here. I'm not reading the Arbor Day proclamation, but I do want to recognize that Arbor Day is a very important part of our history, and Wilsonville had the honor of being recognized as Tree City, USA by National Arbor Day Foundation for 25 consecutive years, and so we do have a proclamation that we want to record, but we're not reading it today. I think before I do, why don't we start with the Wilsonville Wildcats proclamation? And after that, we will go to the Parkinson's awareness. I think you have all the copies of those, Brian, but I have that here. So this is an important week for Wilsonville, and the reason for all of our wonderful attendance, or most of it today, is our athletes and their families and their coaches and faculty at Wilsonville High School recognizing Wilsonville Wildcats Week. And I want to say, before I start reading this, we have a lot of accomplished students in our school system, in all of our sports teams, also in drama and arts, robotics, and many other areas of excellence. Today, however, we are talking about our basketball team, and let me read the proclamation. Whereas Wilsonville residents honor the faculty and administration of Wilsonville High School for providing a well-rounded education that includes co-curricular activities that aid in the development of life skills. And whereas the Wilsonville Wildcats boys varsity basketball team is representative of the high school's commitment to sportsmanship, excellence, and personal development, and whereas these Wildcats have demonstrated skill not just on the court, but in the classroom, where they posted a cumulative first semester grade point average of 3.62, and whereas the 2022-2023 Wildcat boys finished the season with a 13-3 record in conference and an overall record of 24 wins and 5 losses, while posting an average margin of victory of plus 16.2 points per game, or more than 16.2 points per game. And whereas the Wildcats extended their unbeaten streak to a remarkable 92 straight home wins over an 8-year period, a streak unmatched by any high school boys basketball team in any classification in the state's history. And whereas, for the 3rd straight season, Wilsonville's defense was the best in Oregon, allowing just 40.8 points per game, and whereas the Wilsonville boys went 4-0 in the state tournament, locking down opponents and yielding just 28.7 points per game, and whereas this team extended its own state record, appearing in its 7th consecutive state championship game, and whereas under the guidance of the state's Coach of the Year, Chris Roche, the Wilsonville High School boys varsity basketball team defeated top-ranked Summit High School 43-36 on March 10th, 2023, to win its 3rd consecutive state championship, its 5th in the last 6 years of competition and 6th in the program's history. And whereas 3 of the Wildcats players, Kyle Counts, Kellen Guttridge, and Maxim Wu, earned all conference honors, with Counts and Guttridge also earning all-state tournament team recognition. Whereas this Wildcats boys varsity basketball team displayed consistent excellence and exemplary sportsmanship, their success on the court and in the classroom generated positive attention, excitement, and community pride, while serving as an example and inspiration to the Wilsonville community. Now, therefore, the Wilsonville City Council proclaims April 3rd to 7th, 2023 as Wilsonville Wildcats Week. The Wilsonville City Council commends the passion, resilience, and sportsmanship demonstrated by Wilsonville High School students, parents, and community members, and we congratulate members of the 2022-23 Wildcats boys varsity basketball team for winning a state championship. In witness thereof, we set our hands and cause the seal of the City of Wilsonville to be affixed this 3rd day of April 2023. Let's have a round of applause. And
we would like to invite Coach Chris Roach up to say a few words about his team.
Please, Coach Roach, to this podium here.
And then when Coach Roach is done, the mayor and I will be over, or we'll ask the team to come over. I think Bill's already directed them over, and then we will call your names and you'll come up to the podium and we'll hand you a proclamation.
Thanks very much. Mayor Fitzgerald, members of the council, thank you for doing this today. This is really a great group of student athletes. You heard their GPA. They're great kids, not just great athletes, but they're great kids around school, in the community. I think they make their families and their coaches and everybody associated with them proud. But I think them being celebrated by you today is a great thing. It shows them another part of the world maybe that they don't see every day, and how important local membership and government and involvement is. And so for them to be here and witness this is important, I think, on that level. But it's also just a nice recognition of a really outstanding group. They sacrificed for each other. They worked hard. They were committed to a common thing, and they put that above individual things. And I think that's kind of what life is about, trying to do the best you can with others to make it great. And these guys certainly did that. We had 3 seniors that I want to give a special shout out to: Bradley Keswick, Ryan Soderland, and Maxim Wu. They just were outstanding, and to achieve anything like these guys did, you have to have great leaders, and each of them had different roles, and they shined in whatever their role was, and they were tremendous, unselfish, great leaders for our team. So I really appreciate Brad, Ryan, and Max and everything they did. And then a couple of our coaches that are here: Mike Weston's an assistant coach is here, and Aaron Harris as well is here, so if we could give them a hand. It takes a group of us to make it all happen the best we can. So thank you very much again. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What are you going to do, sir? You're going to go there? You go there, or you go there?
You'll handle it.
I will hand it to you.
Okay.
And then you.
I'm going to stand here then. Okay. We'll start with Emmett Fee. Congratulations. And Callan Guttridge. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Kyle Counts. These boys.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Real quick.
Say hello to your grandfather. I knew his grandfather from years ago when I worked with Silverton Hospital. He was on the board, so thank you. Okay, and now Maxim Wu. Thank you. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Cody Dimpfelmeyer.
Congratulations, Cody.
Nick Walters. Congratulations.
Thank you. Congrats.
Nick Crowley. Congratulations.
Thank you. Congrats, Max. Thank you.
Bradley Keswick. Nice to see you. Congratulations. I used to live across the street from him. Nick Collier.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Brooks Carter. Congratulations.
Thank you. Good job, Ross.
Jacob Boss. Ryan Soderland. Congratulations.
Appreciate it. Nice jacket. Thank you.
Carter Christensen. Lincoln Mason. Grant Clemo. So I think we've. Coaches? Oh, the coaches, yes. I have a certificate for
No, yeah.
Chris Roach. Coach Roach.
Very much.
We're making a habit of this.
Yeah, this is good.
Congratulations.
Try to come back next year.
Yeah. And Mike Weston.
Thank you.
Aaron Harris. And Paul Liu.
Chris Rewald?
I don't know.
Chris
So-
isn't here?
Everybody else is not here. We got
everyone?
here, right? Yeah.
Here's some for the folks that didn't make it.
Okay, let's get those up again, let's get
And
it.
then we're gonna get a picture in the horseshoe again?
Now we're going to have a picture.
This way into the middle here, we'll have the counselors come in. There are some boards on the ground, so be careful back there.
Tall guys in back.
There's plenty of those.
Well, I'm not one of those.
Another photo op. We'll make you taller.
Get everybody.
Stretch it out. Yeah.
We've done this a couple of times, yeah. Well, we'll share, first I'll take their focus and then I'll let them.
Over here? Oh, watch out for that.
Let's see here. We gotta work on our stage
Small
picture.
enough group?
Let me have,
Do I have to get back
can you step up, Scott? And then you guys can get over. Each take a half step that way, the first three of you there. Perfect. We got one head I can't see, a couple heads back there I can't see.
Who's hiding back there?
Who's hiding back there?
That guy.
Yeah, I can't see you. Where'd you come from? It's like it grew out of the ground. Okay, I think we're good. So don't look at any other cameras right now. Look at this one. And smile. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now a couple other people might want to take pictures as well.
Wilsonville spokesman.
Yes.
If you guys want to come up, come up here, you can. You can tell them not to move. Hold up. Don't move. Your parents want a picture.
Oh.
I'm sorry. That's okay.
All right, big hand for the parents.
Thank you all for coming.
Can you take a picture of me? Add it to your collection. Appreciate it very much. All right, take care.
Thank you.
You have, I didn't get all the guys together. Oh.
No, it's fine. You want to take another one?
Yeah, I'll take it. Who's in the group? Okay, here you go, one. Watch out.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thanks again, congrats.
That was fun.
Thanks for coming today.
I see he's as excited as Brooks wants to take over me too. Smile.
to also recognize that during our citizen input, we are going to hear a presentation by local resident Kevin Mansfield, who is with the Michael J. Fox Foundation and Parkinson Resources of Oregon, and he's going to provide us some information about April, the fact that April is Parkinson's Awareness Month. And so we recognize that hearing directly from somebody associated with the Parkinson's Foundation, Parkinson's Resources of Oregon and the Michael J. Fox Foundation is a really good way to bring some attention to this important effort that they are making. So we'll hear from Mr. Mansfield and some other people on that shortly. Two more items, I think, for mayor's business. I'd like to ask the city manager to give us a preview, a little summary on the municipal court employment agreement that we're going to vote on shortly.
Happy to, Mayor. I'm just at a very high level. Judge Winehouse has been with the city for, I believe, around 4 years now, and he has not had an increase in his hourly rate for that entire time. So in discussing with his other contract city, the city of Woodburn, this basically the proposal is to get him on par with what the city of Woodburn is paying him.
And we have that in our council packet.
It is in your packet, yes.
And we have that, and I would like to, we have discussed that individually and have the details. And so I would like to ask Council President Aukervall for a motion to approve the contract.
Yes, I move to approve the contract as included in our packet for the Wilsonville Judge Fred Winehouse.
Is there a second?
I second.
The motion has been moved by Council President Aukervall and seconded by Councilor Dunwell to approve the contract as provided in our council packet. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. That brings us to our communications section of our agenda, and I'd like to hear from our Information Technology Director, Andy Stone, on the Sherwood-Wilsonville King City broadband project.
And Your Honor, as Mr. Stone is getting set up here, we did have the council goals adoption.
Oh, thank you. I just skipped that. Can you hold on just a minute, please? I did ask Council President Aukervall to notice if I missed anything, because I had a very long day yesterday. And so thanks, I'm glad I prepped you. So for the last item on mayor's business is adoption of the recently developed city council goals, and we discussed those in our work session. We did ask the city manager to make an amendment to our, regarding including a couple of other items about transportation and our work regarding the airport, transportation, and other things that are important to us. So I would like to ask for a motion to approve the council goals as identified and written in our packet.
And as amended in the work session.
And as amended in the work session.
Your Honor, I move to approve the goals as included in our packet and amended in our discussion during the work session.
Is there a second? The motion's been moved by Council President Aukervall and seconded by Councilor Linville. Is there any discussion?
I would just say, Mayor, that if I don't hit the mark on what it is I thought I heard you wanted, then you can let me know at the next council meeting. And we can make those amendments.
And we'll vote again.
Exactly.
Okay. And I just wanted to, for discussion on that, just comment that we spent a good day and a half working on that together and also preparing in advance. And these are measurable, definable goals that we as a council want to accomplish in the next 2 years. And these goals will require Certain of the goals require budgeting to enable us to accomplish the goals. It also helps the city staff define their work plan for the next 2 years. And I do want to recognize we continue to have other priorities that are are outlined in great detail in our legislative priorities and also in our values. But these are specific goals for the next 2 years that we want to draw attention to. So any other comments? Go ahead.
I'd just like to say thank you to the rest of council through that process of setting the goals, especially during our retreat. And also thank you to staff, because we have a large number of staff members that attend that retreat on a weekend, a full day inside, hashing through some pretty substantive discussion and issues. So thank you greatly to everyone involved.
Thank you. You have 5 counselors with lots of ideas, and we winnowed them down to 6 major goals with a number of strategies under them. So thank you very much.
I'd just like to add one more thing on top of what Councilor Ackerval just said. I think one of the characteristics of a strong city council is a council who can come from different perspectives and different opinions and different ideas, and be able to bring it down to something that works. And it was nice to see us be that successful that day, and it was a long day, but we got to where we needed to go. And I think that that's important for all of our citizens and for us as elected officials to be able to carry that all through.
I appreciate that. I just want to take one more minute on that. As a matter of discussion, I just want to briefly read the headings on the goals. Each of them have a number of strategies. The first goal was to improve the city emergency preparedness. Second was protect and preserve Wilsonville's environment. Third, attract high-quality industry and support economic opportunity for all in Wilsonville. 4, increase housing opportunities for all and reach functional zero homelessness. 5, expand Wilsonville's parks facilities to align with community growth and needs. And 6, enhance communications engagement to build a more connected community. So there's a lot of detail under each one of those. So hearing no more discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. And that brings us to our back to our communications section of the agenda, and I'd like to ask Andy Stone, who heads our information technology project, to discuss the Sherwood, Wilsonville, King City GovRing broadband project. And as the council recalls, and citizens who heard about this before, in 2021, Sherwood and King City Wilsonville, Sherwood, and King City were awarded $1.665 million in legislative earmark funds to help advance this American Rescue Plan project. So we're excited to hear about how it is developing.
Well, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name's Andy Stone. I am the IT Director. I am going to touch on that project tonight, but I'm also going to kind of give a very brief and high overview of just fiber in general in Wilsonville, just to kind of set the stage for this project and many others that we have coming up. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the city's methodology regarding broadband and fiber. We have a long-standing use of fiber in the city, and a number of projects that have a fiber component will be coming up in front of you over the next year. We thought it'd be good to kind of give everyone that quick refresher so that you guys have something to base everything on. So the term broadband is a very popular term right now. There are a lot of things going on at the federal level, the federal and state levels regarding broadband, and it feels like every time we turn around, there's somebody else talking about how we can improve it. In my day-to-day discussions with people, I've noticed that broadband means different things to different people. I found that typically when most people hear the term broadband, they think of an internet connection at their home bringing via DSL, cable modems, fiber, or satellite. While that's part of it, broadband really encompasses all of the infrastructure that it takes to make high-speed digital communications possible. Broadband infrastructure is used to deliver internet to your home, but it is also used for a number of different things like connections to cell phones, communications, to traffic signals, connectivity between all of our city facilities, even GPS navigation in a car. Almost every communication that you can think of uses a broadband element of some sort. There are many areas that have very little or no broadband infrastructure in place. This was made painfully obvious during the pandemic when people had to access resources digitally. That created a push recently to expand broadband resources, especially in areas with little or no coverage. Unlike many rural areas, Wilsonville actually has a lot of access to broadband. Because of this, the city has historically focused on fiber. It's a key component of broadband infrastructure and kind of setting ourselves up for flexibility in the future. So how did we arrive at this approach? In 2017, we contracted with a company called CTC to evaluate fiber in Wilsonville. We had just completed what we call our phase 1 of our fiber build out between City Hall and the Smart Administration Office. The fiber business plan looked at how Wilsonville could utilize fiber, everything from just maintaining what we had to creating a full build of fiber to the home and providing internet access to residents. After looking at all the data and the costs associated, it was deemed that the fiber to the home was just too expensive for the city to offer. Wilsonville residents already had access to high-speed internet, and the costs required for the city to effectively run that program were just too high. A public-private partnership also showed similar economics. The costs just didn't pencil out. On the other hand, the fiber asset was just too valuable to use solely for city purposes. Fiber is the backbone of almost all technologies that make up broadband, and it's a key component of the city's communication infrastructure and many other businesses as well. Fiber and its pathway will continue to be valuable as technology progresses. Ultimately, it was decided that the opportunistic build approach was the best for Wilsonville. In that approach, we tried to put in fiber conduit into the ground whenever the project opens up a street or right of way or something like that. We focus on main thoroughfares and other areas of development. If the project requires a fiber connection for communication, we will pull that fiber in at that same time. The engineering and planning departments have been great partners in this process and continue to work with us as these projects progress. The beauty of this approach is that it is the most cost-effective way to put in the infrastructure. Pieces go in over the years, and then if a new project appears that requires connectivity, the city can stitch together these pieces and pull fiber through to make that connection. This will often make the project possible when the overall costs of the infrastructure or creating the infrastructure from scratch would make the project untenable. The second part is that this is when we put in the conduit and fiber, we try to overbuild where possible. This allows us capacity for things in the future that we don't know about, or gives us the ability to trade or swap resources with other entities. Overall, this strategy gives the city and the council the most flexibility going into the future. And I know this map is a little hard to read. Let me see if I can blow it up just a little bit here. This kind of gives a rough idea of where some of our fiber assets are. Many of these you'll see like along Beckman, along Canyon Creek, through the area of what we call Fifth to Kinsman. These were all put in during those projects so that we didn't have to come back in at a later date and put those in, and so that they're there. This map's a little out of date. We have some other ones that are kind of going on in process right now, but it kind of gives you an idea of the opportunistic approach that we are looking at. So as the mayor noted, in 2021, the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, became available to the state and cities. One of the focuses of the ARPA funds was broadband expansion and creating resiliency in existing systems. Thanks to quick actions by Mark Otnod, Mark Leo, and their counterparts in the city of Sherwood, we were able to apply for a grant, and then the Senator Thatcher and Representative Neron's offices awarded the project of $1.665 million. The overall project stretches from Hillsborough to Wilsonville and focuses on creating fiber infrastructure that can link the communities and counties together. It is being directed by the city of Sherwood because of their existing experience in these types of projects. Wilsonville's portion was going to focus on strengthening our east to west fiber connections, and will utilize Sherwood Broadband's internet capability to bring wireless access to parts of Town Center and Marossi Parks. The IGA that you will see tonight is the first part of that project as we go. Cities were also given access to ARPA funds separate from what was awarded by the legislators. The city has earmarked those funds for a number of things, including fiber conduit runs along Boberg Road and Kinsman Road to strengthen the city's fiber infrastructure and add access to the new Public Works building. We're also looking to add a section along Ritter Road to connect two of the other projects, capitalizing on that opportunistic build approach. And again, that map is very hard to read, so I'll try to kind of blow it up here a little bit. This is kind of a rough idea of where we are looking at bidding out for this project. We will be strengthening some connections along Beckman that you can kind of see in the red, and Kinsman there. And also looking at doing a build up Graham's Ferry and connecting to the Garden Acres area, which was a project that we had done a couple years ago. So that infrastructure was there. What's also not shown in this is that we are looking at going down 95th in conjunction with the water supply project, and kind of stitching this all together to create a resilient pathway for fiber and other communication connections there. So as you can see, the city's broadband strategy is flexibility and planning for the future. We found it almost always cheaper to put the infrastructure in at the time of construction, even if we don't have an immediately identified need. The city planned for conduit in the Willamette, like I just mentioned, the Willamette Water Supply Project along 95th. At the time, we didn't have an identified need, but this ARPA project with Sherwood came up, and now we're going to be utilizing that run to save on the overall build cost of the project. This approach also sets up the city for projects that will require communications in the future. It allows us to work with partners outside the city in need of conduit and fiber. We can trade assets that allow both parties to come out ahead. For instance, we are looking at trading a spare conduit we have in one project with a telecommunications company that has a conduit in an area that we desire. We're going to be able to hopefully make that happen, and it'll be a win-win for both groups, lowering the overall costs to community members and also saving on any kind of construction inconvenience. Technology, as you know, is moving at incredible speed. We don't really know what is going to develop in the future, but it's a good bet that the fiber and conduit it travels in, especially in a city that requires utilities to be undergrounded, is going to continue to have value. So that's a very quick and high-level overview of the city's approach to fiber and ultimately to broadband. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're seeing a lot of movement in this area, and I hope that this will be helpful when you see other broadband topics appear in front of you. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Councilor Dunwell.
Quick question. But first of all, comment. I love your future forward approach. I think that's really thoughtful as we're thinking about where we go next, because you're right, the technology is changing so quickly. Is there any projection on when you will max out the fiber that you're installing, given the growth of the city and potential uses?
The max out of the use of the fiber? Right now, we have a long ways to go at this point. We are utilizing a lot of the fibers for internal. We've got some working with Clackamas County in servicing some of the schools and that type of thing. We tend to put in our main backbone is a 288 strand of fiber. Generally, you only need a couple pair of those to kind of do what you need to do. And there's technology now that allows you to split those fibers to be able to get even more pathways in the same thing. So at this point, right now, I don't see us maxing out anytime soon. The areas where we may max out are some of the branches that go out that are a little bit smaller than the 288 and that type of thing. But right now, we're feeling pretty positive about where we're at.
Thank you, Councilor Dunwell. I really appreciate the update on this and the efficient way of doing this, so thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's all that we need. Thank you very much. And that brings us to our citizen input and community announcements section. And this is an opportunity for visitors to address the City Council on items not on the agenda. It's also a time to address items that are on the agenda but are not scheduled for a public hearing. Staff and the City Council will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizens' input before tonight's meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Use the raise hand feature of Zoom to let us know you would like to provide comments. And I have a couple of speakers here, and I would like to start with two that I think are on the same topic, which is who are Kevin Mansfield and Megan Tay. If you'd like to come to the table here, you can each have you can use the podium. It's your choice. Sure.
First of all, I would like to thank you, Mayor and City Council, for inviting us here tonight. Be patient with me if I get a loss of train of my thought. That happens a lot. My name is Kevin Mansfield. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm a public policy ambassador with Michael J. Fox Foundation for about the last 10 years. I'm also associated as a facilitator with Parkinson's Resources of Oregon, and I've been facilitating with them for the last 21 years. I'm a person with Parkinson's. I was diagnosed in 2001, and it put me out of the workforce. Like I said, I want to thank you, Mayor and City Council, for proclaiming Wilsonville as April as National Parkinson's Awareness Month. This means a lot to me. It means a lot to the people in your community that have Parkinson's disease. You do have, I believe it was 1 or 2 groups that meet here in Wilsonville that have Parkinson's. But right now, because of the pandemic and stuff, they're closed to public, for the public attending. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my story. Oh, I got a short time. I was diagnosed in 2001, and when I went to the doctor, my neurologist told me that I had Parkinson's and to come back and see her in 6 months, and that was it. So, not knowing anything about it, I went home and I looked it up on the computer, which was the wrong thing to do, because it made me super sad and super depressed. So all it talked about was the advanced stages of Parkinson's. I finally came across Parkinson's Resources of Oregon, called them, and they were so kind, they talked to me for 2 hours, calming me down, telling me about it being a slow progression disease, and offered me to join a support group. At that time, in 2001, there was approximately 12 to 14 support groups in the state of Oregon. 20 years later, we're up to approximately 55 to 60 support groups in the state of Oregon and Southwest Washington, telling you how much this disease has grown. It's an estimated that there was approximately 60,000 people, or 60 million people, I'm sorry, 60,000 people that are diagnosed with Parkinson's every year in the United States. In the middle of December of 2022, the Parkinson's Foundation, the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, as well as the Institute of Clinical Evaluation Services, realized and came to that we have a 50% higher estimate of people being diagnosed with Parkinson's. Now we're estimating that there's 90,000 people a year diagnosed with Parkinson's. You used to be able to hear that people had Parkinson's in their 60s, 70s, or 80s. That's not our case today. I was diagnosed in my early 40s. It put me out of the workforce. I've gone back to Washington, D.C. once a year up until the pandemic. And I met a couple women that was 32 years old, having their first child that was diagnosed with Parkinson's. I met a gentleman up on Capitol Hill when we go up there for the day. He was 22 years old with Parkinson's. I went to sorry. I went to a health fair. Sorry, I told you I got lost train of thought. Thank you for bearing with me. I went to a health fair, and I was representing Parkinson's Resources of Oregon at that time. And I was talking to an elderly gentleman, and we're talking about Parkinson's, and he began tearing, crying and stuff. And I asked him if there was something I said to upset him, or if there was something I could do to help him. And he said no, that talking about it was a big help, but he said that unfortunately, a very rare disease in his 8-year-old grandchild was diagnosed with Parkinson's. So this disease is affecting everybody. It doesn't matter what sex you are or how old you are. So with that, I'll introduce Megan that's with me today. I do want to thank you again for doing this for us. It means a lot. If you guys would like to be involved or see what a support group is like, you're welcome to join my group. I have a hybrid group. We meet in Gresham, but if you send me your email information, I'll be sure to send you the link to join it. And it's on the second Tuesday of the month at 2:00 p.m. So ours will be next week.
Thank you very much. And I think we can put something on our website about Parkinson's Awareness Month and give this, you've given us the flyer, which we could ask our library to display in the public information section for April.
Thank you. They'd be very appreciative.
Thank you very much. And appreciate you coming all the way to speak with us about this. And now we'll hear from Megan Tay. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. I'm here as both an active patient advocate with Michael J. Fox Foundation and as a newly diagnosed young onset Parkinson's patient. 10 to 20% of Parkinson's patients are diagnosed younger than the typical 65 and older demographic. We're diagnosed, as Kevin said, in our 20s, 30s, and 40s. While our symptoms are the same as those of older Parkinson's patients, young onset patients have a very difficult, a different journey. Far from retirement, I'm in the middle of my career. I am parenting young children and beginning to care for aging parents. Like all of you, I have an extremely busy life, but now I also have about 10 medical providers that I have to see on either a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis just to manage this disease. I also have to strictly follow medication dosing requirements, which occur every 3 to 4 hours and have to be timed around protein intake to be effective. That's just to be moving and function for a day. There's no crystal ball to predict when my symptoms will take a turn for the worse, but they will. I have no way of knowing how much longer I'll be able to work, care for my family, or be independently mobile. My husband and I have to make very tough decisions about whether to save and invest every penny to prepare for early retirement or splurge for the vacations to make memories for our kids while I'm still independently mobile. This disease is really difficult for me, but it's also really difficult for my family. Overnight, my husband became my caretaker for the rest of my life. My children's lives are forever changed, obviously beyond what I can express tonight without bursting into tears, but I bet you could imagine. The financial burden of my family will have to bear because of the cost of my care is enormous. Parkinson's happens not just to individuals, but families. We don't know exactly what causes Parkinson's, and there is currently no cure. We desperately need funding for research to find a cure. I want to leave you with an idea of what it's like to have Parkinson's. In the beginning, imagine you first start having trouble texting or writing, and then you keep dropping things randomly. Imagine walking into a meeting and freezing as you walk in a doorway, and it taking a really long time for you to get your body to take another step. As things progress, you will drop your water bottle all the time, have trouble getting the lid off, take a drink and spill everywhere all over yourself. Those are daily occurrences. When it gets worse, you'll try to talk and the words won't come out. If they do finally come out, it'll be very slow and difficult to understand. And towards the later part of the disease, your voice will be so quiet that nobody can really understand you, even if you can form the words. And it gets worse and worse until you're able to do anything independently. As my disease progresses, not only will I not be able to walk independently, I will eventually be unable to hug my children, unable to say I love you. Eventually, the day will come when I won't be able to swallow, which is, aside from a fall, my likely demise. That is Parkinson's. This is Parkinson's, and we need to end it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions for us?
I think you've given us an excellent flyer here, this color flyer with the statistics, and also an email for more information. And as I said, we'll ask our librarian to display it in the library, and I will send an email to our senator as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Listening to us.
Thank you. I'm touched by what you've said tonight, and I thank you so much for having the courage to speak up and be a voice, even when sometimes it can be a real challenge. So I honor and appreciate the courage of both of you. So thank you so much.
And please let your families know that we have heard you, and we don't have direct access to the ways to do the funding, but we can advocate for it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I believe I just have one other speaker card. Okay, this is from Clark Hildum. And I have your address on record, so you don't have to state your address, but please state your name.
My name is Clark Hildum, live in Montgomery Way. First of all, I want to thank these people for being here. I've learned a lot about Parkinson's that I didn't know. I encourage you all to support Parkinson's Awareness Month. I'm primarily here to talk about, I missed last month's meeting, but talk about the negotiations you all had between TriMet and SMART. And as a common citizen, it seems to me like the city of Wilsonville is being extorted by TriMet out of a couple $1,000s to allow SMART to cover transportation requirements in the new sections of Ritter Road, the Coffee Creek development area, and they weren't serving the area anyway. So if the city is writing them a check, it's extortion. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I would encourage the city to reconsider and say, nope, go suck an egg, we're not going to do it. Also, the basketball team, I thought that was great, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much for coming to speak to us about that. You helped me feel like we're not alone in this. This is like, I wish I had my son's an artist. I should ask him to draw an image of this scene that I have. There's a poppy seed, and that's us, that's SMART, and then there's Mount Hood, and that's TriMet. And thank you for your encouragement. It's a very difficult process. We're putting a lot into it. We do have a meeting scheduled to meet with TriMet this month, right? And our city attorney is putting a lot into it.
Well, as small as SMART is compared to TriMet, SMART is a by far superior bus service, and I think TriMet is afraid of it. And they don't want SMART to grow, and they don't want SMART to step on their toes, because SMART is much, much better run. I have nothing against TriMet.
Right.
They do what they do, and they're fine with it, but I think we need to tell them to go take a hike.
Thank you. Thanks for coming to see us, Clark. And I know you're a very long-term resident here.
Yeah, 40-some years.
Yes, so you know what you're talking about. All right, thank you. So that brings us to just a minute. Counselor comments, liaison reports, and meeting announcements from the members of our council, starting with Council President Akravall.
Thank you. It's great to hear when community members give feedback about some of the business that we do. It's nice to know people are listening to. Right? I wanted to present about something that I should have done a few meetings ago, but so I apologize for the late delivery of this report. However, a while ago, I met along with Zoe Mombert, I met with the second graders of Lowry, and we did a presentation, which we've done now for a couple of years, where we talk about city government, our form of government, mayor, council, or the council manager form of government, and importance, kind of cover the importance of community feedback in that form of government, and that they have an important role, even as second graders, to provide feedback to the city leaders and be engaged, and that their voice matters in this too. And so I told them that I would share with the rest of the council some of what they shared with me as an example of that, that their voice is important in our community, and we want to foster this as they continue to grow, and hope that they continue to be engaged. So a couple of the items that we discussed, and also they wrote, after our presentation, they all wrote letters, which I responded to with the letters, and I can give you a copy of the letter. We can arrange that, I'm sure, or I can forward something at a point in time. But some of the bullets that were covered, they emphasized that they learned a lot from the presentation. One of the first topics that they initiated was about funding for city water infrastructure and roads, which totally shocked me that this was one of the first things that they brought up, but this was a topic. So we talked a bit about that, and a few of them mentioned that in their letters. They also talked about that voting is a cycle and feedback is important. They had a couple questions. Some of them included, can we build skyscrapers in Wilsonville? And can we have a farm in Villebois? So there's some interest there. I'm reading about land use too, right? I mean, it's these seeds of what local government does, and it was exciting to see that in the second grade classrooms. There were a few specific requests for more parks and more books in the library. A couple titles of books or series of books was called out, and we have shared that with the director of the library as well, the specific titles that have been called out. There was a request, multiple requests for specific stores or goods, and while we didn't talk specifically about how local government facilitates opportunity for business instead of creating like individual stores, there was a request for increase in number of toy stores. Also, just more stores in general, and stores that provided pure dark chocolate, milk chocolate, and chocolate fountains. So if there's interest for this in the community, I can say that. There was also interest for a public pool or a water park, and several letters mentioned playing fields. And then to conclude, there were a number of comments about interest in clean streets and less trash, the importance of helping people, and the need to protect and care for animals, and also care for our environment. So with all of that, I think we are in pretty good hands with the second grade of Lowry. And that's my report for all of you tonight.
Thank you. Well, if we'd had that before we had our council goal session, it would have been shorter. We could have just used it. So thank you. Councilor Linville.
Thank you, Your Honor. I wanted to spend a few minutes giving you my impression of our visit today with Dr. Naganathan from the Oregon Institute of Technology, more specifically Oregon Tech in our community. So he came up from Klamath Falls to meet with us. We had a tour of some of their highlighted programs, which was really an excellent it was an excellent overview, I think, of some of their really fantastic programs. But one of the things that we spent quite a bit of time on that may come up with the council in the future is that as a college president, this man is an out-of-the-box thinker. And he is very committed to technical education. And they will actually be getting one of their first doctoral programs in physical therapy soon at the university. But he's talking about the concern that he has for housing for students, which we have heard, I think, before. And he has acquired or is in the process of acquiring some space in the vacated Xerox building, which is next to the Oregon Tech facility here in Wilsonville. And his idea is to build partnerships with business and industry, education, and government to create a living, learning environment where cohorts of mostly professionals would actually come in for a short period of time, maybe 3 months, live there in that facility, as would maybe staff, and then they would move out and move on to something else. So I think we'll be hearing more when he comes to visit us in May, which will be exciting. And I'm sure this will probably be one of the items that he is, at least now it's just percolating in his head as an idea. So for us, I think the challenge is how can we also think outside the box to facilitate something like that happening? So that's something to look forward to in the future. I will be attending the Rotary Heart of Gold dinner and recognition of the Citizen of the Year on the 6th, just this week, at the Oregon Golf Club. Additionally, there is, I think, when I will just mention it again because it'll be before our next city council meeting, is on Friday, April the 14th, Charbonneau Country Club, in cooperation with Representative Neron and Senator Woods, are conducting a tolling forum, and representatives from ODOT will be there, hopefully to hear what our citizens are thinking. That is at 10 a.m. on the 14th. And then I will also be attending on the 7th a legislative update that Senator Woods is doing at the Columbia Distributing facility. It is sponsored by Oregon Business and Industry. And I did want to let the council know that the governor has appointed me to serve on the opioid settlement, treatment, and recovery board. And my appointment began March 29th and goes until the 1st of January, or 2nd of January. So I wanted to issue my thank you to our representatives from the Michael J. Fox organization as well, and thank you for bringing your personal experiences to us. I think this is televised over and over again, and hopefully our public will get to hear some of your comments as well. So I appreciate that. But I can't also let this month go by without recognizing that there are, if you look, there are important dates on nearly every day in the month of April. And I picked out a couple in response to and in honor of our ever-suffering spokesman, reporter who sits through our meetings and work sessions over and over again. Tomorrow is National Hug a News Person Day. So I hope you get your hugs tomorrow.
Stick around and everybody that's left after the meeting will get together.
There you go. There you go. April 12th is Library Workers' Day. And, of course, we have, in addition to some of the celebrations that are going on this week and this weekend, and Ramadan, which has been a celebration that has been going on. Earth Day is the 22nd, and National Arbor Day is the 29th. And in honor of my grandson, I could not leave out, because he is a 5-year-old budding paleontologist, that the 18th is National Velociraptor Day, and the 19th for our city manager is Wear Pajamas to Work Day.
Okay.
So there you go.
I don't own any, so I'll have to go buy some.
I'm sure you will.
TMI.
Yeah. That's right. And that, Your Honor, is all of my comments for this evening.
Thank you very much. And I want to say that I wish I had, just changing the subject, congratulations, Councilor Linville, and I'm sorry I missed the opportunity to congratulate you and thank you for your agreement to serve on the opioid task force. And this is a great, obviously a very important role. And I guess if you could just, I know we talked about this earlier, but Dr. Linville has a very long and accomplished career in healthcare. And I think not only will Wilsonville be well served, but the entire state by your intellect and experience being applied as a member of this task force.
Well, thank you. I really have to see my role. Actually, the governor's office was not really initially excited about me being on the task force or on the board, and it wasn't me personally, I'm thinking, but she was hoping to get some representation because I am one of 3 appointees that were selected by the League of Oregon Cities to represent the medium-sized cities in our state. So that's my role. So hopefully what I will do is to bring that perspective of how can cities, if money comes down, which we're hoping from the settlement, what are realistic expectations of cities, particularly our size, in being able to provide services and treatment for opioid addiction. So I see myself not particularly as a healthcare provider in this role, but as a city elected official representing all of the cities of our size across the state. So,
Well, thank you for taking on that additional duty and helping people and cities and our state out. And now I'd like to ask Councillor Berry for comments.
Thank you. Yeah, congratulations, Councillor Linfield. I'm really proud that you're going to represent cities that are medium size on the task force. I think you'll do an outstanding job. So I'll just briefly summarize what I did. On March 23rd, I attended the Clackamas Cities Association. It was a dinner in the city of Sandy, and the mayor presented information on covered structures. They were able to obtain some grant money, and when I first saw the announcement that that was going to be the topic, covered structures, I was thinking covered wagons. But when I got there, it was actually covered structures like covered patios. So they obtained a grant through the Urban Renewal Program so that restaurants that were struggling through the pandemic, that they could have a covered outdoor patio area and continue to have their patrons come and enjoy their restaurants. And so that was pretty cool. And then they also had a second speaker. It was Senator Daniel Bonham from District 26, and he shared his views on legislative issues, including tolling. Then today, along with Mayor and with Councillor Linfield, I also attended the Oregon Tech tour. It was really, really interesting. When I think of Oregon Tech, I didn't really know very much about the programs, and I was thinking it's about technology and engineering, and I learned it's also about healthcare. And like Councillor Linfield had mentioned, the President Nagy, he really is a man that has a vision, and he was talking about how education and how the workforce has really changed. And, you know, like in my parents' generation, people might work at the same employer for 50 years, and then they retire and get their gold watch. And then people more in my generation are finding that maybe we change our careers 2 or 3 times before we retire. And the younger generation, the millennials, they're changing really quick and maybe focusing more on gigs. And so he was talking about for future programming at the Oregon Tech to have more certificate programs and programs that people could do like in maybe 3 months or 6 months and really get intense training and then be able to get out into the workforce. And I was really impressed with some of his ideas. I thought they were really forward thinking. And then he was also talking with us about housing opportunities so that people could come in from across the state or maybe even from nearby states, come stay in Wilsonville for this intense training and have the housing for the instructors and for the students so that they not only can attend the programs, but they can also build a community and exchange ideas and build networks. And I was really impressed, and I thought it was really fun to see about their program and learn, more about our businesses in Wilsonville and how government can work and education can support our businesses. And then on April 5th, I'm planning to attend the Tourism Promotion Committee. And so that's from 1 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that will be exciting. And one of the things that we talk about is the Explore Wilsonville. And you can go on our website and learn more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Berry. And now we'd like to hear from Councillor Dunwell.
I'll keep this brief. Thank you all. Thank you, Mayor. I actually attended on the 20th of March, along with the mayor, the visit to our city hall by the Philippine Consul Generals of Oregon and San Francisco. And it was really wonderful to be able to host them. And in addition, we're looking at how we continue to develop and grow our relationship with them, which I think is really important, particularly with all of our, whether they're indigenous or they're communities from places like the Philippines or other individuals. Other than that, I've had a pretty quiet couple weeks, but I do want to call you out very quickly and thank you, Councilor Linville, and I'm so appreciative that you stepped up to the plate, and that you'll be on the opioid settlement group. I don't believe that many of us know how significant and how deep this touches families in our state and in our community, and they're often families that we would least expect. And the challenge that we have ahead of us is it's not just the typical opiates that you think of. It's not heroin and things like that. Fentanyl has infected our country. It is cheap, it is deadly, and it is very, very difficult to fix. So I know that you will have your work cut out for you, and I'm just so pleased that you're stepping up to the plate and doing this. It is something we cannot forget. It is impacting homelessness, it is impacting the future of our generations, and it is impacting the lives of so many families in this country. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Dunwell. I really appreciate the points you're making. And I think every person has a role to help in this, however small or large. That brings us to our consent agenda. If the city attorney would please read the resolutions by title and the items on that.
Resolution number 3050, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville authorizing the city manager to execute an intergovernmental agreement on broadband services and infrastructure sharing between the City of Wilsonville and the City of Sherwood. Resolution number 3052, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville endorsing the Wilsonville Smart Regional Transportation Plan project list and authorizing the mayor to sign a letter to Metro stating as such. And minutes of the March 20, 2023 City Council meeting.
Thank you. Council President Ockervall, would you like to make a motion on the consent agenda, please?
So I move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Is there a second?
I second.
Motion to approve the consent agenda as read has been made by Council President Ockervall and seconded by Councilor Dunwell. All in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. That brings us to new business. Will the city attorney please read the resolution?
This is resolution number 3053, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville authorizing the city manager to execute a real estate purchase and sale agreement between the West Lynn Wilsonville School District and the City of Wilsonville for the purchase of approximately 2.93 acres for a neighborhood park located in Frog Pond West.
Thank you. Will Councilor Linville please offer a motion regarding this resolution?
Your Honor, I move to approve resolution number 3053.
Is there a second? Motion's been moved by Councilor Linville and seconded by Councilor Dunwell. Is there any discussion? We had plenty of detail on that earlier, and so seeing no discussion, I will call for the vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. That brings us to continuing business. Will the city attorney please read the two ordinances?
This is the second reading of ordinance number 875, an ordinance of the City of Wilsonville annexing approximately 9.63 acres of property located at 25540 Southwest Garden Acres Road for development of a corporate headquarters/fabrication facility and associated site improvements. And this is also the second reading of ordinance number 876, an ordinance of the City of Wilsonville approving a zone map amendment from the Washington County Future Development 20-acre FD-20 zone to the Planned Development Industrial regionally significant industrial area, PDI-RSIA zone, on approximately 9.63 acres located at 25540 Southwest Garden Acres Road for development of a corporate headquarters / fabrication facility and associated site improvements.
Thank you, and I have a procedural question. Are we going to vote on these separately?
Separately, yes.
Okay. Tonight, we will consider on second reading ordinance number 875. Public testimony was accepted during the public hearing, which was closed after the first reading. I ask once again, do any members of the City Council wish to abstain, declare a conflict of interest, or report any ex parte contact or any information gained outside of the hearing?
No.
No. At this time, does staff have any follow-up information to present, or do any members of the City Council have questions for staff?
No further follow-up, Mayor.
No questions. Seeing no questions, Councilor Berry, may I have a motion on the ordinance on second reading?
I move that we approve ordinance 875 on the second reading.
Is there a second?
I second.
Motion has been made by Councilor Dunwell and seconded by, motion has been made by Councilor Berry and seconded by Councilor Dunwell. Is there any discussion?
Your Honor, I think in the motion...
On second reading.
Without having Councilor Lehan here, I believe it's adopt.
Oh, she would love you for saying that.
I know she would.
She might be watching.
Councilor Berry, would you like to amend your motion to use the word adopt?
Yes, I would.
Councilor Dunwell, would you like to second the amendment?
Yes, I will second the amendment.
The motion has been moved and seconded, and as amended, all in favor say aye, or excuse me, we have a roll call vote.
Correct.
As former Councilor Lehan would have reminded me. So hearing no further discussion, I hereby ask the city recorder to make a roll call vote. Those in favor of adoption of the ordinance will, as their names are called, answer aye, and those opposed answer no. Those who wish to abstain from the vote will answer abstain. The city recorder will now call the roll.
Councilor Berry?
Adopt.
Aye.
Aye. I'm sorry.
Councilor Linville?
Aye.
Council President Akkerval?
Aye.
Councilor Dunwell?
Aye.
Mayor Fitzgerald?
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Now I will go to our second resolution. Tonight, we will consider on second reading ordinance number 876. Public testimony was accepted during the public hearing, which was closed after the first reading. I ask once again, do any members of the City Council wish to abstain, declare a conflict of interest, or report any ex parte contact or any information gained outside of the hearing?
No.
No.
No. At this time, does staff have any follow-up information to present, or do any members of the City Council have questions for staff?
No further follow-up, Mayor.
No further questions. Councilor Dunwell, may I have a motion on the ordinance on second reading?
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 876 on second reading.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Oh, go ahead. Thank you. The motion has been moved by Councilor Dunwell and seconded by Councilor Berry. Is there any discussion?
No discussion.
No discussion. Hearing no further discussion, I ask the city recorder to make a roll call vote. Those in favor of adoption of the ordinance will, as their names are called, answer aye. Those opposed will answer no. Those who wish to abstain from the vote will answer abstain. The city recorder will now call the roll.
Councilor Berry?
Aye.
Councilor Linville?
Aye.
Council President Akkerval?
Aye.
Councilor Dunwell?
Aye.
Mayor Fitzgerald?
Aye. Ordinance number 876 passes. I would like to now make a statement that is with regard to both ordinance number 875 and 876, and And that is to say that if you desire to appeal these decisions to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals, you must file notice of intent to appeal stating the grounds of the appeal in the form and with the time prescribed, within the time prescribed by state law. That brings us to city manager business.
Mayor, you mentioned the TriMet meeting that will be held on April 14th. And I think that's all I have. And I'll report back to council, and let you know how that went. Or the mayor can.
I'm sure that we will hear about it.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Sure.
Did TriMet request that meeting, or did we?
I think it was, the
answer is
genesis
no.
of it, no. No, the short answer is no. I think the person behind it was Rep. Neron.
Yes. Senator Woods and Rep. Neron both spoke to representatives of TriMet about this.
Yeah.
And Representative Neron issued a number of dates for this possible hearing, and I'm pleased for people, not hearing, but meeting to discuss this. And I'm glad to see we have a date that early in April.
I think they've allotted 1 hour, which I don't know how much we're going to get through in 60 minutes. Hopefully there's some flexibility on both sides of the table that.
I think that's what Representative Neron offered, that she, and I think we'll plan for the best for that 1 hour and decide what our next steps would be.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else?
That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Any legal business?
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
Thank you. Our meeting is adjourned at 9 p.m. and we will convene for an executive session after this meeting is adjourned.